Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Daenerys. The clear skies of the evening gave absolute free range for Daenerys and Drogon to take to heights clouds restricted. But with such cold temperatures and a freezing gust brushing past her face, Daenerys kept lower to the ground. Jon and Missandei followed her closely on Rhaegal, while Ygritte and Lyras kept close to them. They had seen many things during their return flight from Highgarden. The Reach and Lannister armies marching north with the Unsullied and Dothraki and nearly a dozen castles and villages. It wasn't until Winterfell appeared over the horizon did Daenerys feel comfort and relief, forgetting about the cold. She hadn't spent as much time there as she did in Dragonstone, but something about that place made her feel like it was home. But the feeling slightly diminished at the sight of the growing army around the castle. All of it kept to one side of the road that led into the castle, specifically the side that the dragons didn't nest at. Rhaegal, Ygritte, and Lyras all landed immediately, but Daenerys and Drogon circled around Winterfell once before preparing to land. With Drogon's massive size, the other dragons had to be first and move afterwards, otherwise Drogon would become territorial and take up all the space. By the time Drogon swooped down and landed next to his kin, Jon and Missandei had already dismounted. Rhaegal and was waiting for Daenerys. Drogon slowly lowered his body and neck as close to ground as he could before Daenerys climbed off with Jon's assistance. "It's good to be back," Daenerys declared. "I couldn't agree more," Jon replied before planting a light kiss on her lips. They both smiled as they walked arm in arm back to Winterfell. In the corner of her eye, Daenerys could see Missandei smiling to the ground as she followed them. When they reached the gates, they were greeted by none other than Lord Reed, followed by two of his Crannog men dressed in heavy cloaks. "Welcome back, my king and queen." Lord Reed gave a courteous bow along with his men to Jon and Daenerys. "It's good to see you again, Lord Reed," Jon told him. "Lord Brandon has requested your presence in the Godswood." Jon sighed, as if anticipating such news. "Of course he is." Lord Reed stepped aside with his men to let Jon and Daenerys through. As Jon tried to walk forward, Daenerys tugged on his arm and stopped him. "Is something wrong? I'm just feeling a bit tired from our journey. I think I'll retire for the evening." Though she was tired, Daenerys didn't like being around Bran. His empty mood and knowledge of everything made her feel uncomfortable. "I'll join you after I meet with Bran," Jon said, smiling as her before letting go of her arm and following Lord Reed to the Godswood. Daenerys walked through the courtyard with Missandei next to her, passing others who were working hard preparing for the war. Even though she was married to Jon and accepted by the Northern Lords, she felt that people kept their distance from her, but did it politely. It wasn't long before the two of them reached Daenerys' chambers. "Would you like me to have a bath drawn for you, Your Grace?" Missandei asked, being professional as always. "Not tonight," Daenerys replied. "Maybe in the morning." Missandei nodded as she helped Daenerys out of her thick winter dress and into a purple silk nightgown. She unbraided her hair and set her rings next to the pillow that her crown rested upon. Daenerys noticed a tight fit on her breasts and wasn't bothered by it, but knew she would need her clothes resized for her pregnancy. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Missandei asked, as Daenerys gently tied a band around her waist. "No, that will be all." Missandei bowed her head and started to walk out of the room. Daenerys was always amazed at how faithful Missandei always was to her. Not just as an advisor, but as a friend as well. "Missandei," Daenerys said, stopping her. Missandei turned around to face her queen. "Yes, Your Grace." Daenerys was hesitant to speak to her. "When Jon and I take the Iron Throne back and the Seven Kingdoms, would it be wrong of me to ask that stay with me?" Missandei grew a small smile that was comforting to Daenerys. "If I wanted to go back to Knights, I know you wouldn't object to my request." "Of course not. It's your home after all." "It is the place of my birth, but not my home. Home is where I was freed from the Masters. Home is where my friend ended slavery. Home is where I choose to make it. I choose to make the world you're going to create my home." "But what about your family? Don't you want to see them again?" Missandei's expression turned grim and somber. "My family is gone from this world. I have nothing left to return to in Nath." "Forgive me, I didn't mean to pry like that." "There's nothing to forgive, Your Grace." Missandei returned to her comforting smile. "Will that be all?" my queen. Daenerys returned her a smile. Yes, it will. Good night, your grace. Good night, my friend. Moments after Missandei left, Jon had entered the room, looking more broody than usual. He removed his crown and placed it on its pillow next to Daenerys's, before working on his cloak and armor. How did your talk with Bran go? Any news worth mentioning? Jon sighed as if disappointed. Nothing good, he told her as he placed his black Stark armor on an armor stand before placing the already removed gorget over it. Cersei's placed all of her wildfire underneath King's Landing. If we survive the war against the dead and our army is still stronger than hers, she might destroy the city. Daenerys sat down and the bed before letting her body fall onto it. She felt irritated and upset at Cersei. No matter what they did, it seemed that if Cersei couldn't sit on the Iron Throne, no one could. You were right. About what? What you said to me when we first met, at Dragonstone. We're all just children playing at a game, screaming that the rules aren't fair. I don't mean that anymore, at least to you. Daenerys lifted her head up from the bed, while arching her brow, wondering if that was just him being flattering or honest. We'll have to think of a way to get the wildfire out of the city, and, if we can't do that, we'll have to figure out how to get the people out. Bran's staying in the Godswood for a few more hours, to see if he can see anything that will help us. Jon was finally out of his regular attire, and into his night clothes, as he walked over to the bed and joined Daenerys on top of it, lying over the fur covers and staring up at the ceiling. The solemn mood was broken when a knock on the doorframe sounded. Jon and Daenerys both looked over, and saw Reckon. "Can I come in?" he asked nervously, looking as if he might have interrupted something. "Of course," Jon told him as he and Daenerys sat up. "Is there something wrong?" "Yes and no," Rickon said, confusing both of them. "I went hunting today, about 10 miles from the castle, and almost got killed by a bear." "A bear?" Jon asked, intrigued. "There are no bears around here." "I know, yet there was one. I told it to Bran just now and he said the animals are all fleeing south. They can feel the Night King growing closer. We'll have to have our hunter go in larger groups." "How'd you get away?" As if on cue, the large white direwolf popped his head out from around the corner and stood next to Rickon. Daenerys was wide-eyed, never before seeing a wolf of such size or color. The wolf looked at her with ruby-red eyes and he was bandaged all across his neck as he came into full view. Jon smiled widely as he got up and approached his companion. "You always wander off on me, boy," Jon said as he rustled his hand through the fur on his direwolf's head. "He fought off the bear before Nymeria, and her pack killed it," Rickon announced, looking proud of the direwolf. "Nymeria's here too?" Jon asked excitedly. Daenerys had to assume that they were talking about the other direwolf of the litter. Jon found with his siblings. "She's staying in the forest. I think she's waiting for Arya." "Jon," Daenerys said, "aren't you going to introduce me?" "Sorry," Jon said. "This is Ghost. If you didn't call your dragon your children, he would be to me what they would be to you." Ghost left Jon's side and walked right up to Daenerys, sniffing at her belly. "I think he knows there's another wolf in the room somewhere." Daenerys giggled a bit before nervously petting Ghost over his head. He didn't look like a normal wolf should. He looked quiet and peaceful. Ghost turned his gaze up to her and gave an unsettling stare. For some odd reason, Daenerys felt like Ghost recognized her. Quietly, Ghost left her side and returned to Rhaenys. "I see he still prefers you over me now," Jon stated, looking betrayed. "It's getting late. Off to bed with you." Rickon sighed at Jon. "All right, I'll see you in the morning." Rickon and Ghost left Jon and Daenerys alone, and Jon closed the door behind them. He blew out the lanterns in the room before returning to the bed. He got under the fur blanket, and Daenerys joined him. She placed one hand under her pillow and the other over Jon's chest. "I'm glad I got to finally meet your direwolf. I'm surprised at how calm you were. Most people jump when they see him. I've spent the past few years with dragons at my side." Ghost looked more calming than intimidating. Jon chuckled at her observation. "Don't let him hear you say that. He'll prove you wrong on the battlefield." "I hope so," Daenerys told him. "We'll need all the strength we can get." Daenerys' thought dwelled over the oncoming doom that they could not escape. But her fatigue got the better of her, and she felt her eyelids starting to weigh down. "Sweet dreams, my wolf." Jon placed his hand over hers and kissed her forehead. "And to you, my dragon." The winter night became blessed with a light snowfall as the moon was swallowed by the clouds. All around Winterfell, many souls were sleeping with a gifted slumber. But there were those who could not enjoy such a feeling. In the bedchambers of the king and queen, there was one soul who was tormented with nightmares, much so that its mother began to share them. After passing through the veil of darkness that was sleep, Daenerys unexplainably found herself in a place she knew she had been before. She was standing in front of a lift contraption that carried men to the top of the Great Wall of Ice. She curiously gazed around at her surroundings as she walked to a railing overlooking the courtyard and saw a large group of men, all wearing black, surrounding nothing as if they were waiting for something. Her gaze shifted when she saw two people enter the courtyard, one a small boy but the other she recognized. He was her husband after all, but looked so different than how she knew him. He didn't wear his hair in a bun and his beard was much thinner. He was led to the empty space the men surrounded and then had a troubled look on his face when he saw what they surrounded. Daenerys leaned her head over and saw Jon staring at a sign that read traitor. Daenerys gasped out of fear and shock when Jon turned around and was stabbed by his own men. For the watch, they all said as some of them took turn to burying their knives into Jon's body. Now she knew where she was, and more so when she realizing this was a dream. Daenerys desperately wanted to wake up so that she would not have to witness such a sight. She looked at Jon's face and could see the emotions he felt. Confusion, loneliness, fear, and sadness. Having to watch him be like that broke her heart. When the young boy he came with used his own knife and planted it into Jon's heart, like all of them, he spoke the words, "For the watch." Jon fell back into the snow, and all the men who betrayed him left his body to freeze. When they had completely dispersed from the courtyard and the blood began to spread, Daenerys slowly walked over to Jon's body and stood him, near the verge of tears. But before she could do anything, Daenerys found herself in a cold room. Jon was lying on a table, stripped naked, and his wounds clean. Someone had closed his eyes, and he looked like he was resting. Ghost was lying down next to the table, being ever faithful and remaining with his friend. Without even thinking to, Daenerys reached her hand out and felt the skin of Jon's cheek, as if trying to tell him everything would be all right. The moment her skin touched his, Ghost shifted and raised his head up, looking directly at her. Daenerys pulled her hand away, mystified at Ghost's gaze at her. Could he really see her, or was he looking at Jon? Before she could do anything to confirm anything, Jon was suddenly gasping desperately for air. Daenerys woke from her visions, finding herself back in bed with Jon, her hand directly over Jon's scar. She shivered when she realized she witnessed his first death and resurrection, but looking at him now calmed her down. He looked so peaceful, sleeping, and felt so warm. Unable to regain the desire to sleep, fearing that she might witness another vision like what she saw, Daenerys slowly moved out of Jon's touch and climbed out of bed, leaving him to rest. She put on some easy-to-wear boots and Jon's winter cloak, since she did not have one of her yet, and left the room. She left the warmth of the castle and out to the cold night of snowfall. The castle was nothing like what it was during the day. There was no sound of hammers striking steel, no sound of saws cutting through wood. It was utter silence. But even with the mood as peaceful as it was, the guards on watch duty distracted Daenerys from finding peace. So she went to the one place she knew there would be no guards. Things always became calm when she was in the Godswood. She never took to any gods, even after all she has seen. But in the presence of the Weirwood was where some of the greatest moments she had took place. Her first kiss with Jon and even her wedding with him. Everything that was evil never seemed to invade such a place. As she drew closer to the Weirwood, Daenerys stopped when she saw Bran in his wheelchair, sitting next to it. He wasn't in the middle of his warging, but he was staring off into the distance. She wanted to turn around, but he took notice to her presence. "Your Grace," he spoke soft but loud enough for her to hear. "You can't sleep?" Daenerys cautiously approached him, nervous of what he would tell her. "I just had a bad dream is all," she told him. "You saw Jon die." Already Daenerys felt shivers run through her body. She did not hate Bran, but she didn't like when he would know everything. "I did. It's not the first vision I've had, but usually they don't make much sense. It wasn't your vision you were witnessing. It was your son's." Daenerys froze, finding herself unable to speak immediately. "My sons. You have Greenseer inside you, Daenerys Stormborn. While you carry him inside you, he will show you and his brother what he sees." "Brother? I'm having 2 sons?" He didn't reply since he already stated the answer to that question before it was asked. Daenerys did feel some joy, but it was overshadowed by fear of what Bran's power was, and he knew it. "How do you see what you see?" It's difficult to explain. His gaze turned to the snow falling around them. Look at the snow. Daenerys followed his gaze and did as he instructed. Do you see how they all fall in front of you, passing by and disappearing before another takes one's place? I see everything that was and is like this. It all passes by, but if I focus on one, I can see the details of it. He held his hand out and caught a snowflake that quickly vanished after making contact with his skin. He turned his empty gaze to her and extended his hand out to her. Would you like me to show you something? She wasn't sure whether to accept his offer or not. All of the visions she's ever had always frightened her and never made sense as to why she had them in the first place. Placing her trust in him, Daenerys took Bran's hand cautiously. He maneuvered their hands together so that both of them were placed over her belly before placing his other hand on the weirwood. Daenerys felt a strange sensation run through her before she realized she was no longer in the Godswood of Winterfell. Instead, she was back at Castle Black with Bran standing next to her on a balcony surrounding the courtyard. But the castle looked far more lively and populated than it did in her first vision of it. This is what the Night's Watch was almost 70 years ago. Bran informed. There's someone who just arrived I think you should see. Bran led Daenerys through the castle, not giving any head to those around him until they came to a door. Instead of opening it, Bran and Daenerys were suddenly in the room, like changing from one place to another in a dream and not paying attention to it. Inside, the two of them saw a man wearing a thick black robe and a chain around his neck sitting down at a desk and going through scrolls. He had long silver hair and his eyes were the same as Daenerys's. He's a Targaryen, Daenerys deduced. He sent you a letter before he died. Daenerys became speechless when she realized who this was. Her great-uncle Aemon looked far different than she imagined, but then again, she only did imagine what he looked like at the age he was when he sent the letter. The door behind them opened, and another man walked in, carrying a white bow in his hand and a beautiful longsword strapped to his hip. The hilt was gold with a black leather-wrapped handle and a large ruby planted in the center of the metal that wrapped around it, forming the guard, making it look like a blood-red eye of the sword. He carried a satchel at his side that looked like it was heavy with luggage. The man himself had similar features to Aemon that only another Targaryen could have. Unlike Aemon, however, he did not wear the black of the Night's Watch. How was the hunt? Aemon asked. The game was fair. We shot enough rabbits for a week. The other man said, his tone like Bran's lacked any emotion in his words. What about him? Daenerys asked. That man is Brynden Rivers, Bran informed. Daenerys knew full well the man who belonged to that name. The Blood Raven, who had 1,000 eyes and one. Brynden leaned his bow up against the desk and took a seat next to Aemon. How's your vision faring? Aemon set the scroll he was currently reading down and sighed at his kin. Not well. I can see things up close, but nothing far away. Can't you do anything about it? Every illness has a cure, even grayscale. I could, but I can't. My request for materials and tomes from the Citadel was denied. It won't be long until it gets worse. You'll manage. We're the blood of the dragon, and dragons do not let petty things like this stop us. Brynden removed the satchel from his side and placed it on the desk. These are for you, to keep safe. He opened the lid and pulled out 2 dragon eggs, one blue and one white, both turned to stone. Aemon looked shocked and mystified. Where did you get these? The blue one I received from a contact who found it in a market in Essos. The white one I stole from White Walls before the second pretender tried claim it before his rebellion. Brynden stared at the eggs, looking full of shame. That's why I killed Aenys. He knew I had the eggs and was going to claim them if I didn't stop him in time. Aemon picked up the blue one and moved his hands over the scaled surface. Brynden, I cannot take these. You can and you must. Once I take my vows, I'll be made a ranger and go beyond the wall. Who knows how many times. I cannot take these with me. Every time I go. Send them to Aegon. I'm sure he can keep them far better protected. He probably could. But what his children after him? How would the eggs be safe if a mad Targaryen sat on the throne? You and I both know that these are more than just stone. As Aemon set the egg back onto the desk, there was a quick knock on the door. Commander Mugswood is coming. A man's voice said. Brynden and Aemon put the eggs back into the satchel and slung it over the backing of Aemon's chair. The door opened, and in walked an older man with a thick short beard and long brown hair that was starting to gray. "Bloodraven," he said in a thick northern accent, "it's time for you to become a man of the watch with the others." "By your orders, Lord Commander," Brynden said with a courteous nod. Daenerys' gaze followed him as he picked up his bow and followed the Lord Commander out of the room, leaving Aemon to himself. When Brynden closed the door behind him, Daenerys turned her head back to Aemon and was shocked to see that they were in a completely different room, and Aemon was in a bed, far older than before. His hair was short and thin, and he looked to be near 100 years old. Sitting next to his bed was Samwell and the wildling girl, Gilly, while her baby little Sam was lying near her wrapped in blankets. Daenerys walked over and stood directly behind Sam as he kept watch over Aemon. "Egg," Aemon called out softly. "Egg, Mother's looking for you." "Egg." "Get some sleep, Sam," Gilly said. "You'll have to speak for him tomorrow." "You don't know that," Sam told her. "Get some sleep. I'll watch over him." "I'm staying too. He's always been good to me. I can't leave him now." "Egg?" Everyone except for Bran gasped as Aemon's hand shot up and Sam held it gently. Aemon's breathing became heavy, and he looked weak and blindly gazed at the ceiling. "Egg? I dreamed that I was old." Daenerys was starting to feel heartbroken watching him like this. She regretted taking Bran's offer to see this vision, but all emotion within her froze as Aemon's head drifted and his eyes locked with hers. He breathed heavily, and then looked happy without even smiling. Then his breathing stopped, and his eyes fell close to being shut. The next thing she knew, Daenerys was back in the Godswood with Bran, and he took his hand off of her belly. She felt a stinging in her eyes and wiped away tears that were just about to fall. "Why would you show me that?" she asked, her voice choking. "I thought you would want to see him. He was the only other Targaryen who had love for you in this world besides Jon and your mother. I thought you should see who he was long before he sent you that letter. But why then? Why did you make me watch him die?" "I didn't bring us there. Your son did." Daenerys moved her hand over her belly, surprised but still saddened from witnessing such an event. "He wanted you to see that." "But why would my child want to show me something like that?" "I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that Maester Aemon saw you when he looked at you. He got to see his family before he left this world." All of this was too confusing for Daenerys. These were only visions. How could her great-uncle have seen her? "I'm still learning to understand the power I have, but I don't need it to know when someone gives another a gift." Was that what that was? A gift? Why would my son give that to me? Why do we give gifts to anyone? Daenerys was clueless and thought this was some form of riddle, but when the simple answer crossed her mind, she couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Because we love them. She wiped her cheeks clean and gathered her composure. "Thank you, Bran." Back in her room, Daenerys returned to bed and kept close to Jon. He slowly moved his arm around her shoulders and held her softly. "Everything all right?" he asked softly, still half asleep. Daenerys smiled as she rested her head over his breast. "We're having 2 boys," she told him. Jon lifted his head and opened his eyes, still groggy. "How do you know?" "Bran told me." Daenerys lifted her head up and saw Jon smiling at her. "Now all we have to do is name them." Jon laughed quietly as he let his head fall onto his pillow. "Do you have any suggestions?" Daenerys thought about the question. One of her sons was a dragon, and the other a direwolf. They could each have a name that fit their blood. One a Targaryen, and one a Stark. "Aemon," she quietly said, "after our uncle, who kept watch over you." "It sounds perfect," he told her. "What about his brother?" "You should pick. He'll be a dire wolf like you, so he should have a northern name." Jon let out a large exhale and shook his head. "I can't think of any of my family that have a good name that fits with Targaryen. So, choose your own." She nuzzled her head onto his body and let herself drift away back to sleep, knowing neither her or her sons would be plagues with nightmares. The last word she heard before falling into slumber made her heart feel warm. Matthias. Sansa. Even though it felt wonderful to be back home, things could not have been more stressing than they were turning into. With all of the soldiers pouring in from the south, many problems arose that were more than needed to be dealt with. More than 100 game wardens had to protect the wildlife in the forests within 15 miles around Winterfell to keep it from dying out. But luckily, many of the soldiers who came brought caravans of food and supplies from their own respective regions. The Reach was even bringing extra shipments of food to North, to what was hopefully a sign of good faith. One of the bigger problems, though, was figuring out the best way to organize the camps so that one realm wouldn't be situated next to another that quarreled against each other. Even with help, such a task was far more difficult than it seemed, given that near every realm is fought against the other at one point in time, and some people are too stubborn to move on. It was then determined that since the Night's Watch could not guard the wall, they would act as peacekeepers long enough for everyone to remember that fighting amongst themselves was the last thing they needed. Sansa joined Daenerys, Jon, and Tormund in Great Hall, sitting at a table discussing some minor things regarding the War Council, with every lord and commander that would be representing the armies. Ser Jorah kept his vigil watch over the Queen, a few paces from them all. "There will be over 200 people gathered together," Jon informed. "The ideal place to do it would be in the courtyard, but there's not enough room and too many people will be at work." "What about on the hill just outside the castle?" Sansa suggested. "You could stand at the foot of it and address them all." Tormund shook his head at the idea. "There's not going to be any unoccupied land outside the castle for 2 miles when the rest of the armies get here. But there are some huts that are still empty. I can get the Free Folk and the Giants to rebuild them into a longhouse, big enough to fit every one of these commanders and 6 giants." No one was objecting long enough to assume that would be the best course of action. "Then let's not delay any further," Jon said. Tormund nodded at him and got up from his seat to leave to his duties. As he left the room, a Stark guard entered in his place. "Your Grace, Lord Edric Dayne is about to arrive."
"The Dornish are here already?"
Daenerys asked. "No, Your Grace. Just Lord Dayne and 4 of his guard. This is curious, but by all means, let us not be terrible hosts and not greet him," Daenerys suggested, to which Jon and Sansa both agreed. Near the gates, Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Rickon, who joined them out of desire to meet Lord Dayne, and Ser Jorah stood by as Edric rode in on a Dornish stallion, followed by his men, one of which carried the Dayne banner. Ghost sat next to Rickon and earned a great deal of attention from many who were still not used to his presence. "Your Grace," Edric addressed as he dismounted his horse and approached Jon. "I'm glad to have made this quick." He quickly bent the knee to Jon and Daenerys, and his men followed his example. "Rise, Lord Dayne," Jon said before Edric obeyed. Something Sansa noticed was that Edric had not stopped looking happy since he entered the gates. "We thought you would be with your troops." "No, they're still a few days away, along with a certain something I owe to you." Sansa felt a little excited to see the crown of Aegon the Conqueror herself. There were few relics of the Targaryens of old, and that was one of them. "I hope I didn't cause a problem arriving early. I was just too eager to see Winterfell for the first time, let alone be in it." "There's no problem at all, Lord Dayne," Sansa said, being ever so courteous as a lady should be, "though I am afraid to say that we have no vacant rooms in the castle." Edric's smile died, and he looked like someone beat him at his own game. "Is something wrong, my lord? In my haste to get here, I did not have any of my men bring with us any means to camp. Those supplies are with my army. I'm afraid, but I'm sure we can manage something." "You can take my room for now," Rickon offered, looking full well ready to do so. "My Lord Stark," Edric said, "I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't usurp the room of my host. And if I did, where would you sleep?" "My bed used to belong to my older brother, so it's large enough and I won't be using tonight anyway, so you might as well." "What do you mean?" Jon asked, looking confused as everyone else was. "What are you up to?" "Nothing. I'm just going to spend the next few nights with some friends." "What friends?" Sansa asked. "The ones who were with me when we almost got killed by the bear before Ghost saved us." Sansa had a sudden flashback to when Rickon told her, and Arya about that. Sansa had become a concerned mother figure, while Arya laughed the whole thing off. "A bear," Edric said. "Now that is story you'll have to tell me one day, my lord." "Very well, I accept your offer so long as it's all right with the king himself." All eyes turned to Jon as he chuckled quietly. "I wouldn't want you to only keep Ghost as company," he said directly to Rickon. "I'll allow it, but only until his army arrives with his things." Rickon grew a large smile and looked like he was the happiest person in the world. Jon shifted his attention back to Edric. "I think we have some vacant huts in the camps your men can use for the nights." "Splendid. I'll see that they get situated before I do. But when I return, I would properly like to meet that dire wolf of yours." Edric looked fascinated at Ghost, whereas many others before him only looked afraid. He bowed his head to all of them before leaving with his men. "Sansa," Daenerys said. "Yes?" You haven't stopped smiling ever since Edric rode in through the gates. Sansa's smile disappeared quickly, and her expression became slightly embarrassed. She wasn't even paying attention to herself the entire time. In fact, she was keeping all of her focus on Edric. I'm just glad that I finally got to meet with him, more than I did at the Dragon Pit. That was the best answer she could give at the moment, since she didn't know why she was smiling at him to begin with. A few days passed by, and all around the castle were soldiers from all over the world. The only host missing from what was pledged to aid against the fight in the north was the last of the Dothraki, from Highgarden. But word from a wildling warg had reached that they would arrive very soon. After finally getting comfortable being in Tynion's presence, Sansa found herself spending a lot more time with her in Winterfell, along with Missandei of Nath, seeing as they were the only ladies around near her age. Daenerys was occupied with Jon and her duties as queen, so there was rarely any time they could have leisurely with her. Arya spent very little time in the castle compared to Sansa though. Ever since Rickon told her that Nynaeve was in the forest near the castle, Arya was determined to find her. The three of them were standing on the balconies of Winterfell, watching Edric Dane having a sparring match with one of the unsullied soldiers that Missandei couldn't seem to take her eyes off of. The two of them had been going at it for near an hour now, and neither of them could best the other. But even with all of their fighting, Sansa could tell that both of them were shivering from the cold. The three ladies were dressed in thick fabrics meant for the winter, but Edric and the Unsullied man were in fine leathers, only suitable for warmth in a northern summer. My money's on the Unsullied, Tyrion said openly. Who's your money on? When Edric learned of Tyrion's survival and presence in Winterfell, he tried to get her to agree being naturalized and become the head of House Martell, but Tyrion refused him, stating it wouldn't matter soon enough. I do not place bets, Missandei informed. But if I were to, I have no doubt that Grey Worm will win. Ever since the Unsullied arrived, Missandei had been brighter and more cheerful, and she spent much time with the commander that made her suspect that the two of them were more than what they appeared to be. What makes you certain? Sansa asked. From what I've seen, Lord Dane has a better offense, but his opponent levels the playing field with an equally skilled defense. She wouldn't place any bet either, but she had full confidence that Edric would win. There's a difference in their fighting, Titan said, looking ever watchful at every movement. Edric has better skill than Grey Worm, but he hasn't the experience of a real battle, which is something Grey Worm looks like he has. Sansa switched from looking at their fighting to looking at their moods. Edric looked very calm and determined, but he knew that this was only a sparring match. Grey Worm, on the other hand, looked composed and hardened, treating this like a real battle. Edric had just parried a thrust made to him and tried to swing his sparring sword down on the wooden staff. The Unsullied wielded to break it, but he was bashed with a shield before he could. Edric kept his distance and looked like fatigue was starting to wrap around him, but he could see that it was also happening to his opponent. You look tired, Grey Worm, Edric taunted. Maybe you should rest. I can stand guard for days without food or water. Yes, but can you fight for days without food or water? Edric twirled his sword in his hand before advancing on Grey Worm. The Unsullied commander made another thrust at Edric, who easily dodged it and was able to grab hold of the shaft this time. Before Grey Worm could push Edric away, Edric pulled himself under the staff and kept on the outside of Grey Worm. Edric used his grip on the staff to create a barrier that Grey Worm wouldn't be able to reach past. But before he could bring up his sword in a position for a yield, Grey Worm let go of his shield and gripped the staff with his other hand. With a powerful bash with the spear, Edric was knocked away and stumbled backwards. The next thing he knew, Grey Worm swept the staff under his feet and he toppled over. In the split second he had before the end of the staff representing the spearhead was pointed at his body, Edric rolled towards Grey Worm in the snow and managed to wrap an arm as Grey Worm's leg and held the round tip of his sword at the location of an artery in the leg. Had it been a real sword in a real fight, Edric would have won, and Grey Worm knew that. Sansa failed to keep a smile to herself as she looked over to Missandei and Tyen, who looked beaten. Aren't you both glad neither of you have any money to lose? Sansa jested as she looked back at the two men. I concede, Grey Worm admitted as he offered a hand to Edric, who gladly accepted. Well fought, Lord of the Stars. Thank you, my friend, but that name belongs to someone else, I'm afraid. Edric brushed the snow off of him before wiping a cold sweat from his brow. I think that's enough for the morning, wouldn't you agree? No, the Unsullied are prepared to train at any moment of any day. Edric chuckled as he patted Grey Worm on the back. Soldiers until the end. Come, I saw a barrel of ale in the other courtyard. Let's go share a drink of it. The two of them approached a weapon rack and placed their training weapons back where they got them. I have had wine before. I didn't like it at all. Wine Shine. Edric scoffed. I'm talking about a northern ale. Wine is for fancy lords and ladies who drink to make themselves look fancier. Ale is warriors of every breed. Edric noticed the cold stares he was receiving from the audience of ladies on the balconies, and just shrugged his shoulders at them, as if asking, am I wrong? He wrapped his sword belt around his hip and pulled it tight. Not only did he have first light hanging from it, but he chose to bring dawn as well. He did not claim it as the sword of the morning, but given the circumstances, the living would need every sword it could get. Come. Edric put one arm over Grey Worm's shoulders and forced him to join. You were certain Dane would win, Tien said to Sansa, as she rested her elbows on the wooden railing, and leaned back. But I can tell you're not knowledgeable enough in swordplay to have known. I didn't know he would win, Sansa replied, but I've watched my brothers train growing up, and just guessed from what I saw before. You watched boys playing while growing up, Tien countered. These were men sparring. She made a valid point, and Sansa could see that there was no way to give a good answer. That wasn't the honest one. Tien herself was a great fighter, so she would know if what she said would be real input, or just something to make her sound like she knew she was talking about. I guessed that Edric would win, because I hoped that he would win, Sansa admitted, causing Tien to arch her brow high. And why, pray tell, did you hope that the Lord of Starfall would win? That was a question that Sansa couldn't seem to answer, for she did not know it. She couldn't deny that she admired something about him, but she couldn't figure out what. She thought about the way he fought and how he looked like a gallant knight facing his enemy. I suppose it's because he reminds me of what I dreamed of when I was a little girl. A brave knight, as honorable as my father and fearless in battle. Just saying that amused her as she shook her head. But those were just dreams of a stupid little girl with stupid dreams before she learned the world is nothing that we learn it to be. The world is in fact shit. Tien agreed. But it's not shit enough to not want to dream of something better, is it? Tien shifted her gaze to Missandei. You were a slave before you met the Dragon Queen. Right. What was that like? Missandei shifted and folded her hands in front of her. I'd rather not say. It's not so much as describing what living was like, but more of what it feels like to property rather than a person. But surely even you must have wished for something better. Of course I did. I would sometimes dream of being back in Noth with my family, or living with people I could call my friends. It wasn't long until I achieved one of them. My point exactly. Tenshinai pushed herself off of the railing and faced Sansa. We've all faced some of the worst the world has had to give us, yet here we are. It's the gift of our dreams and hopes that make it so. The world doesn't have to be the shit one we think we live in, until we live no more. Valar Morghulis. All men must die, Missandei translated, but we are not men. Indeed, we are not. The three of them walked together on the balconies, surrounding the training yard, and entered onto the battlements surrounding the main courtyard. They found Edric and Grey Worm standing in their path, looking out to the armies. Tell me what you see. Edric said to Grey Worm. Grey Worm sighed as he gazed over the battlements. I see the armies making camp. Yes, can you tell me what kind of soldiers you see? The Unsullied, the Dothraki, Stark, Lannister, there's a banner for almost every house out there. Exactly. Isn't that the greatest thing you have ever seen? Grey Worm looked at him, puzzled once again. I do not understand. Edric smiled at him for missing the big picture. What you just looked at is probably the greatest army the world has ever seen, and probably will ever see. I can guarantee you that someone probably wants to kill someone else standing next to them, but that hasn't happened. All of these men come from kingdoms that have all fought with and against each other at some point in the history of Westeros. But for the first time ever, they fight together. One country as one army with one purpose. As Grey Worm was understanding what Edric meant, he looked out to the encampment once more, but this time he really looked at it. To Edric's pleasure, Grey Worm formed a proud smile. Edric noticed the ladies approaching them and turned to face them. My ladies, did you enjoy the match? Very much, Lord Dane. Sansa replied. Tyen shrugged her shoulders at them. It would have been better with live steel. Edric gained some amusement from her. Yes, but we don't want anyone to die before the battle happens. Do we? Edric turned his gaze back to the armies, but something caught his eye. If I had to guess, I would say that the last of the Dottie are arriving. Everyone turned their heads to look out over the ramparts, and could see a large group of Dothraki riding on the road. A force of near 500, a small group broke off and continued onward to the castle, while the rest turned to join the rest of the horde in the camps. After looking closer at the smaller group, Sansa noticed a small detail about it. Those two aren't Dothraki. Two of the riders approaching the castle were not dressed in the furs the Dothraki wore. Instead, one of them was in Lannister armor and the other in gold-tinted armor. Finally, Tyson said with an eager face, "My man arrives." She departed from everyone and immediately went to greet the riders. Jaime! The weathers during the course of travel to the north were very kind of the Dothraki. From Highgarden, the snows were light, the trails clear, and the days the sun shone were relatively warm, if not for the cold air. The morning light of the sun danced in the clouds, but even with the delightful setting, the mood was dull and gray. The Dothraki hardly ever spoke to anyone but among themselves, and kept to their own language. Aemon had to admit he was glad to be on a horse rather than walking, but he wished he didn't have to have his arms bound behind him. It was because of Bronn that they were taken as prisoners rather than stragglers. When they encountered the Dothraki on the King's Road, they were refused help at first, until Bronn told them that they were valuable enemies who almost killed their queen at the Blackwater Rush. If it wasn't Jaime showing them the stone he had, he and Bronn would have been dragged by horses rather than riding them. Their weapons and the bag that contained the stone were confiscated by a Dothraki, who kept by them at all times. But even in such a predicament, Bronn found it easy to stay optimistic about the whole situation, given that he had began signing while on the road. As he lay on the ground with the darkness around, and the taste of his blood on his tongue, his brothers knelt by him and prayed him a prayer. And he smiled and he laughed and he sung, "Brothers, oh brothers, my days here are done. The Dornishman's taken my life. But what does it matter? For all men must die. And I've tasted the Dornishman's wife." Quiet! One of the Dothraki, who spoke the common tongue, shouted. "What's the matter with a song?" Bronn asked. "It's the only thing we have to pass the time. Singing is for the women and children." The Dothraki spoke. Bronn shrugged at him. "You're just jealous 'cause you can't sing." The caravan came to a halt on the road, and unfortunately for Jaime and Bronn, they couldn't see why since they were at the rear of 500 men. But that was about to change when a rider from the head rode to them. "You too," he said, "to the front." "Of course," Bronn said. "Just let us learn how to ride with no hands first." Before the joke could get any reactions, their bonds were cut and their hands freed. Without arguing, Jaime and Bronn followed the rider up to the head of the caravan and came to the top of a hill that overlooked the valley, and beyond them was Winterfell. Jaime's mood darkened when he saw the castle. It was here that he practically started the War of the Five Kings. He had heard about Littlefinger's part in the attempted murder of Brandon Stark's life, but it was Jaime's fault the opening was there to begin with. He expected he would be lucky if he would be graced enough to at least have cell to sleep in by tonight. The leader of the caravan was approached by two other Dothraki on horseback. He spoke something in their language to them, while directing their attention at areas in the largest encampment Jaime had ever seen. The two nodded their heads and rode back to the rear of the caravan. "Keisha Dothraki," the leader shouted out as he spurred his horse into a gallop, and everyone followed. Near halfway to the castle, the main section of the caravan broke off to a wide pass for riders to enter the encampment, leaving Jaime and Bronn with an escort of their own, consisting of them, the leader, and 10 other Dothraki riders. Entering through the gates into the courtyard felt like entering to door into hell for Jaime. He had absolutely no place here or anywhere. He was instantly surrounded by Dothraki as he dismounted his horse and waited with Bronn. Sorado, a Dothraki from the castle, began to approach the escort, looking happy to see them. "Abraco," the leader exclaimed as the two of them shared a brotherly hug. They looked pleased to see each other until the tone of the conversation changed when the leader looked over to Jaime and Bronn. The one who greeted them said something before leaving them. Waiting in the courtyard. "Nervous?" Bronn asked. "The last time I was here, I pushed a 10-year-old boy out a window and crippled him." Jaime looked all around him and saw hatred behind eyes of those that recognized him. "If they don't kill me today, then I'll be nervous. Don't worry, your brother won't let that happen. And I'm sure the king and queen won't either. I think you're forgetting that we both tried to kill the queen in battle." We did," but my hide is redeemed for doing what I could in King's Landing before switching sides. I'm sure once they learn you went as far as to try and kill the Mad Queen, they'll welcome you with open arms." Ray scoffed, disbelieving and doubtful of Bronn's prediction. "It's not them I'm worried about. It's every damn lord in the North. The North remembers, and so do they." Ray Crane glanced around the courtyard and saw many hateful stares in his direction. "Now there's a truly wonderful sight," Bronn said as he stepped past the Dothraki and into the arms of a young woman. She slapped him across the face that surprised everyone who saw them. "You're late, handsome," she said. "And you've just earned a fucking up the ass." Bronn replied casually. "Can't wait." She began to violently kiss him and lightly bit his lip when she pulled her head away. Her eyes fell onto Jaime and her mood turned from lustful to hateful. "Why is he here?" "He was the commander of his sister's armies," Bronn told her. "But after trying to kill her, I think he's been stripped of that title." Bronn turned back to face Jaime. "I believe you've already met Jaime before." Jaime felt nothing but rage at her. "That I have." Before things could grow violent, Jaime and the others were graced by Queen Daenerys' handmaiden, one of the Unsullied, Sansa Stark, and Edric Dane. "Welcome, Ser Jaime and Ser Bronn," Sansa greeted. She looked just like her mother, and was every bit as poised as her. "I welcome you to Winterfell. We were expecting you to arrive with your army." "There were complications," Jaime informed. "I have urgent news for the King and Queen. They are preoccupied preparing for the war council that is to take place with all of the present lords and commanders. But that won't be for another couple of hours or so. Until then, you can get situated with your men." "That wouldn't be the best of ideas," Bronn interjected. "For a man with a death sentence on his head, putting him in the middle of the executioners wouldn't be smart." "Death sentence?" Sansa asked. "That tends to be what traditionally falls upon someone who tries to kill a queen." There was a moment of silence between everyone while they all put two and two together to understand what he meant. "Would it be possible for me to see my brother?" Sansa regained her composure before answering. "Of course, I'm sure he'll be wanting the same." "I'll escort them to Lord Tyrion," the handmaiden said. "Thank you, Missandei," Sansa said. "If you'll follow me, Ser Jaime." Missandei spoke something in Dothraki to the men escorting Jaime. One of them was the one who had his things, before leading them into the castle. It wasn't long until they came to a closed door guarded by two unsullied soldiers. Missandei knocked a few times before opening the door. "Forgive me for the intrusion, Lord Tyrion, but Ser Jaime has arrived." Jaime stepped forward into view of Tyrion, and Varys were both sitting down at a table. "What a coincidence," Varys said. "We were just talking about him and some rumors that I believe will be pleasing to the king and queen." Varys got up from his seat and folded his arms into his clothes. "I'll excuse myself so that the two of you can have a moment." Varys left the company and Tyrion, who gestured for Jaime to take his place. Before he entered, Jaime swiped the satchel Harry gave him from the Dothraki who carried it. "This stays with me," Jaime said, as the large man put a hand on the pommel of his curved sword. Missandei spoke something to him and he retreated from any aggression. "You may keep your bag," she told him, "but your weapons will have to remain with us until you see the king and queen." "Not unreasonable to ask," Jaime agreed. "Thank you for the hospitality." He walked inside and the door was closed behind him. To Jaime's surprise, Tyrion did not have any form of wine or ale within his reach. "Going sober, little brother?" "The only way that would happen is if the stores of ale ran out." The two of them shared a small bit of laughter together. "I'm sorry about your child," Tyrion said as he turned grim. "I'm not," Jaime admitted, shocking Tyrion. "Better to be with Myrcella and Tommen than wherever Joffrey will be greeting Cersei when she dies." Jaime took a seat next to Tyrion and placed the satchel on the table. "What's in the bag?" Tyrion prodded. "A gift for the king and queen." "Yes, but what is it? Am I not entitled to surprise you?" It wasn't long until the door opened and Missandei walked in. "The king and queen will see you before the war council." "War council?" Jaime asked. "To plan for the battle at the wall." "Of course. Forgive me. I'm afraid we don't have any rooms to spare in the castle, and the barracks are full." "It's not a problem, Missandei," Tyrion told her. "He'll be guest in my quarters until we can find suitable accommodations." "Could you have some meals sent, please?" "Absolutely. Lord Tyrion," Missandei gave courteous bow before departing. Left alone again, Jaime expected that these moments might even be his last. He was hated by almost all of the world, so it would be no surprise to him if he were to lose his head tonight. "I just realized something, little brother." "What would that be?" Tyrion asked. "I never learned how in Seven Hells a hideous-looking dwarf became the hand to such a young and beautiful queen." "Hideous?" Tyrion asked, mocking Guarme's statement. "You're still jealous that even with a scar I'm better looking than you." Tyrion hopped down from his seat and approached a trunk in the corner of his room. He opened and dug through it for a minute before retrieving a flask. "Let me tell you a tale of a lion, a spider, and a bear that met a dragon." The light of the outside sky was turning into the orange of twilight, as the early night of winter quickly came. After some hot meals and a long story, Missandei returned to Tyrion's Solar, and found two men laughing at tales of Mereen. "I swear it by all the gods," Tyrion exclaimed, while trying to contain himself. The poor man pissed himself when Grey Worm killed the masters next to him. If it weren't for the alcohol in him, Jaime wouldn't be on the verge of tears laughing. But he and Tyrion calmed down when they saw Missandei standing in the doorway, wearing a smile that was tolerating them. "Forgive us," Tyrion said, "too much wine. This is exactly the reason why you are denied any when you're alone." Missandei let out a big sigh and recomposed herself. "It's time for the meeting to begin." Tyrion corked his flask and set it on the table. "Then let's not keep everyone waiting." He sounded as if he had instantly sobered from the wine. But given that he drank only a small portion of what he usually does, it wasn't surprising at all. Jaime only had enough to make the storytelling amusing, but not enough for him to be seen as a drunkard in front of the entire world. He grabbed the satchel off the table and pulled it over his shoulder. Instead of going to the Great Hall, Jaime and Tyrion followed Missandei outside and out of the castle. They and their escort of Dothraki walked into the camp outside Winterfell, passing many log huts until they came to a rather large log house. Standing guard to a doorless entryway were two giants. Jaime had to take a moment to remember. He wasn't drunk enough to be imagining what he saw. One of them looked down at Jaime and snarled at him. He spoke something in a language he had never heard before, and proceeded to follow Tyrion inside. The interior was much bigger than the outside made it look. More than 200 people were seated in bleachers on one side of the building, as if they were to be an audience to their king, queen, and the Starks who sat in full view of them all. On the opposite side, hanging on the wall behind the Targaryens, was a large map of the wall that focused mainly on Castle Black. Lying down in front of Jon and Daenerys was a large white direwolf with red eyes, looking calm and quiet. Yume looked around and saw the lords and commanders from the Westerlands, all of them staring back at him like people did when he was first named Kingslayer and Oathbreaker. Before Yume realized it, he was standing before Jon and Daenerys Targaryen. Tyrion and Missandei took their places next to their king and queen, leaving Yume alone, with two Dothraki guards, one of them wearing his sword belt. The constant chatter in the building quieted down when two unsullied guards banged their spears on the wooden floor. Jaime felt slightly embarrassed. He was the only one who wasn't sitting down with the other lords and commanders. Missandei stepped forward and projected her voice loud enough for all to hear. Before is Jon, Aegon VI of his name, and Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, rightful king and queen of the Andals and the First Men, protectors of the Seven Kingdoms, the White Wolf and the Mother of Dragons, lord of the Dreadfort and Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, the Winter Dragon and the Unburnt, the Sword of the Evening and the Breaker of Chains. Beside them is those who have hosted you on their lands. Lady Sansa Stark of Winterfell, Wardeness of the North, Lady Arya Stark, Lord Brandon Stark the Three-Eyed Raven, and Lord Rickon Stark, heir to Winterfell and the North. There was constant chatter echoing her words in other languages, most likely translating for those present from Essos and beyond the wall, that didn't speak the common tongue. She stepped back as Jon Targaryen got up from his seat and stood before everyone. "We thank you all for coming, including those who would see us dead and us them. But before we begin, we have an important matter that must be taken care of first." He looked right at Jaime, and all eyes followed. Jon returned to his seat before going on. "Welcome back to Winterfell, Setjani," Jon said.
Thank you, Your Grace.
"The Queen and I were informed that you had an urgent message for us, but we already know about the wildfire. That wasn't surprising, given that they had the greatest lord of spies at their command and a boy who could see through the eyes of animals. However, I don't believe the men who believe that you betrayed them know, or the rest of the realms for that matter. Jon gestured his hand, allowing Jaime to have his moment to address the men of the realms. Jaime turned around and had never felt more nervous in his life. He would much rather stare down the large black dragon again than do this. He cleared his throat before finally speaking loud enough for all to hear. Many of you know that my sister is in possession of large amounts of wildfire. While planning for the march north, the other commanders of the Lannister forces and I tried to negotiate with her to bring it with us to use against the dead. Our request was denied for different reasons than we were told. Some of the Lannister commanders began to murmur with each other before Jaime proceeded. It is true that Cersei is using the wildfire as a defense against the Targaryen armies and the dragons, but not the way we thought. She's emptied her stores and placed it all underneath King's Landing, ready to set the city in flames before giving up the Iron Throne. This caused a great commotion among all of the people of Westeros, save the wildlings. A few people were so bold as to rise from their seats. Lies. Treachery. She's a mad queen. Fighting would have broken out if it wasn't for a noise louder than any dragon. One of the giants standing outside stuck his head through the entryway and let out a loud roar, shutting everyone up. He retreated back outside and everyone began to calm down and took their seats. My lords and ladies, a voice came from the group of men from the Riverlands, belonging to Bronn, as he stood up. As one who tried to steal some of the wildfire from Cersei, I can support the truth Sir Jaime speaks of. Who the hell are you? Someone shouted out from the Westerlands. Bronn of House, Blackwater, newly appointed Lord of the Twins. I was a commander for the Lannister forces, and spied on Cersei for Tyrion. After the meeting of the Dragon Pit, I tried to smuggle out some of the wildfire from the Alchemist Guild, but it was all gone by the time I got to the vaults. If you don't believe any of this, you're welcome to ride back to King's Landing and look underneath the city. The tone and sound of his voice carried absolutely no trace of doubt, and it seemed to be enough to shut up the men of the Westerlands. We knew of this treachery long before many of you arrived. We also learned that Jaime Lannister tried to put a sword through Cersei before he fled from King's Landing, trying to end such madness before it could go on. Jon's gaze fell directly onto Jaime, and we also know that you are one of the reason any of us are here to begin with. Jaime looked puzzled before Jon looked over to Brandon. It was because of you. My brother became crippled with his condition. Your actions gave Peter Baelish a window of opportunity to send an assassin to kill him. I can only accept the punishment for my actions and mine alone, not the actions of others. I agree, but what punishment do you think you deserve? Death. Or maybe your own legs should be broken. Your family always does say that a Lannister always pays his debts. Those words were the force that drove the Lannisters to feared for many years, but they were a double-edged sword. I'd prefer to die fighting if I had the choice. Send me to the front lines of the army when the dead come, and I'll be gone before the battle even begins. But that's what I think. What does the Targaryen king have in store for me? Nothing. The decision of your fate lies with the one who you harmed. Jaime's gaze shifted to Brandon, who kept the same expression he did when Jaime Fist entered the room. It was horrifying to stare at like he was, as if he was peering directly into Jaime's soul. Would you raise your right hand, Sir Tommy? Brandon asked. Tommy obliged and showed everyone his hand of gold. You were one of the greatest swordsmen alive before you lost your hand. Now you're a cripple, like me. The debt has been paid. Jaime became confused as he had never met someone so passive as Brandon Stark. It was as if he was focusing on now rather than dwelling on the past. He was also amazed that none of the Northern Lords were objecting. Most of them probably lost many sons and fathers to Jaime and his father, but they remained quiet and tame. You heard him, Jon said. That debt is paid. Jaime didn't know what to feel. He was grateful that he was given mercy, but didn't feel he truly deserved it. He could hear many murmurs of discontent, but nothing more than that. However, there is one more debt you owe. And what would that be? Daenerys Targaryen stood up from her seat and assumed a regal stance. I do not easily forget those that would try to harm me and my dragons. If it weren't for your friend, my dragon would have turned you to ash at the Blackwater Rush, and I don't easily forgive. So tell me, how do you plan to repay this debt? Your Grace, Tyrion interjected. Given that my brother failed at his attempt to kill you, The only thing equal in payment would be another failed attempt to kill a queen, which he has already done. Jaime didn't know if Tyrion was trying to be serious or clever. Whichever it was, it didn't seem to amuse Daenerys, but it did amuse some of the lords watching. "If I may," Jaime said, "I brought you something I think you will be pleased to have. Whether or not it clears my debt, I do not know." Jaime rested the satchel in his right arm before opening it and pulling out the red and orange stone. When it came into the sight of Jon and Daenerys, their eyes widened and jaws dropped. "Where did you get that?" Daenerys asked. "I received it from Harry Strickland, before I fled. He told me his men found it deep in the Dragonglass mine, on Dragonstone." Jaime took a few steps forward and offered the stone to Daenerys, who took it carefully, as if receiving a newborn babe. "If that's not enough, the only other things I have are my swords. They both rightfully belong to you, after all." Jon and Daenerys looked puzzled and desirable for an elaboration. "If I may?" Jaime looked over to the Dothraki who had his sword belt and waited for confirmation. "Shafka, Ashat Maya Arak." Daenerys said to the man, "I Khalees." The Dothraki undid Jaime's sword belt from his waist and returned it to Jaime. With some difficulty, Jaime was able to strap his belt back around him before he drew Widow's Wail from its scabbard and laid it on the ground. This sword is one of two that was reforged from ice, the sword of House Stark. Jaime drew his other sword and laid it down next to Widow's Wail, and this is what is left of the Targaryen sword. Blackfire. The bottom half was lost after a duel with Arthur Dayne. "That's happened to the other half," someone among the lords said. "I am the eldest son of Tywin Lannister and the rightful heir to Casterly Rock in the Lannister armies." Jaime turned from Jon and Daenerys and faced the lords of the Westerlands. "Honor and oath swears your allegiance to me. If you choose to still follow Cersei, even after what has been revealed, then you're nothing but mad oath-breakers." All of the Westerland lords looked insulted, but also ashamed. Jaime returned to facing the Targaryens. "I offer to pledge the allegiance of House Lannister and any of its loyal forces to you, the rightful king and queen of the Seven Kingdoms. All I ask is that you do everything you can to help me make sure that there won't be years of reign from a mad queen." Jaime sank to one knee in front of all the lords of Westeros to bear witness. Daenerys and Jon both looked impressed at the humility he was expressing, but undecided. Daenerys took her seat, still holding the egg in her hands, before quietly conversing with her husband. After a quick moment, Jon stood up from his seat and walked directly in front of Jaime. He picked up Widow's Wail and held it carefully in both hands by the hilt and the blade. "You will not be losing your life today, Jaime. Do you pledge to swear fealty to House Targaryen and its claim as rulers of the Seven Kingdoms?" It was far better than the alternative. "I do, now and always." "Rise." Jaime stood up face to face with the young king, not recognizing him as the bastard of Winterfell. He met his first time being in this place, but instead seeing parts of a prince that was long dead that he once called friend. "If you stand beside us on the battle and keep the promise your sister could not, we will deem you worthy to be of what you are, by right." He offered Widow's Wail back to Jaime. "This sword is yours now. May it serve you well." Jaime slowly wrapped his fingers around the golden hilt of the sword, and strangely felt a warmth coming from it. For once, he felt like he was doing what he wanted and not what his father wanted for him. "Thank you, my king." From behind, the sounds of men banging on their seats could be heard, meaning that many were both impressed and satisfied. "Now please, be seated." Jon gestured his arm over to a spot at the front row of the Night's Watch representatives, next to the Lord Commander and Benjen Stark. Jaime sheathed Widow's Wail and took his seat. "Well done, Lannister," Benjen said, patting him on the back. "Now then," Jon said after picking up Blackfire, "let's talk of how to defeat the dead." Jon, with the trial of Jaime Lannister concluded, all that was left for the evening was to plan for the battle at the Wall. Stepping up to the large map, Jon set Blackfire on his chair before pointing out Castle Black's location. "The Night King and his army are going to strike here in just over a month's time. They'll bring their entire force and so will we." Everything was riding on the certainty of this. Being a soldier of the dead gave Jon a vision of what was to come. But what if the Night King knew of the plans and changed them? No, Jon knew the Night King would meet his challenge. "We should seal the tunnel," a Riverland lord shouted out. When once that was the best idea to stop an army marching south on the Wall, now such a plan would be fruitless. Only a few of them knew that such a tactic would be completely pointless. It doesn't matter what defenses or fortifications we establish at Castle Black. Most of you may not know, but the Night King rides an undead dragon and has all he needs to bring down the wall. Many men murmured, sounding distressed at such a revelation. But that won't happen, because we're going to bring the wall down first with our dragons. Everyone seemed stupefied at what Jon just said, like they misheard him, but considering what he just told them, their reaction wasn't surprising. I know that may sound ridiculous. Ridiculous. One of the Lords of the Reach said. It's outrageous. Why in 7 hells would we bring down the wall? It's the only thing keeping them from reaching us. If we can just kill their dragon, we won't have to worry about it collapsing at all. And how would we do it? A Lord of the Riverlands objected. With some scorpions or arrows. I heard about the Battle of Blackwater Rush. Cersei's device failed to kill the Queen's dragon, and arrows bounced off its scales like they were nothing. The Night King only has 1 dragon. We have 4. He won't stand a chance. This man knew nothing of dragons, and there hadn't been a battle of dragons for over a century. Their fire would be useless against one another, and the Night King, only dragon glass and Valyrian steel, would be able to defeat him. Quiet, Jon shouted. The 2 men settled down and waited for Jon to speak. We can't risk setting all of the dragons to fight the one. If we were to lose one of ours, it would only come back as another empty soldier of the dead. Please, at least hear the entire plan before objecting to it. Jon realized that this would be no discussion, like among the Brothers of the Watch or his advisors of the North. There were more seasoned and battle-tested commanders with him than he is. He turned back to the map and moved his hand over the area of Castle Black. We'll rim down the wall and use what we can to rebuild it. But only smaller. Every man who knows construction, stonemasons, woodworkers, will march north as soon as possible. They'll be accompanied by the builders of the Watch and the Giants to help with the construction and work to create a barrier arching out to the north side of the wall that will be crossable to the foot soldiers and draw them to us. On the south side, we'll build a pass that will become narrow and force the dead to only be able to get through in small numbers. We'll post our archers at the ramparts we create on the north side and destroy as many as we can. Once the dead get close enough, the archers fall back behind our infantry on the south side of the wall, who will all be stretching from each side of the pass at the exit way. The rest of the foot soldiers will be behind the spears and shields if the dead break through. So far, everyone was on track and respectful to Jon's wish of waiting. While the infantry holds their lines, our combined cavalry of the Dothraki and Westeros riders will divide and be stationed on the north side of the wall, entering through Queensgate and Oakenshield to flank the dead from the east and west. Jon returned facing all of the lords and commanders. As for the Night King and the dragon, I take my mount and 1 other to follow and engage them in the air. Queen Daenerys will take the other 2 and ignite the haunted forest to prevent any of the dead from escaping. And with that, Jon was concluded. Only few who listened did not talk with others about this strategy. Your Grace, a man from the Vale stood up from his seat, gaining the attention of everyone. How can you be certain that the army of the dead will arrive when you say? Our warg scouts have been keeping watch over it by seeing through the eyes of animals. We'll also be sending 100 of them with the builders to keep watch over the lands beyond, in case there are any changes. Jon realized that this wouldn't be the last of questions. If anyone else has anything to say, step forward. More than a dozen men got out of their seats and stepped down to the foot of the bleachers. Less than expected. We'll start from the left. Jon looked over to none other than Edric Dane. How wide will the gap we make be? This wasn't the first time this question crossed Jon. He consulted Sam about this matter, and he told him that sheer force of the wall collapsing would shake the ground for miles. I don't know. The force of the collapse could bring the wall crashing down for miles for all we know. That's why we need every builder we can get to go north. We'll try to control the destruction as much as we can. The next lord after him was a commander from the Westerlands. The Lannister forces brought 1,500 barrels of pitch. Are we not to use them at all? We will. We'll dig 3 trenches along the areas where the wall once stood, and fill them with pitch. We'll have bridges for the archers to cross over and leave them to burn when we ignite the pitch. Combined with what the North has in its stores, we'll have enough fill all 3 of the trenches and launch the rest with catapults if we have the time to build them. It would be a miracle if they would be able to reconstruct the debris itself in time. Your Grace, the next man said, Again from the Westerlands, what is your plan for the archers that retreat? We'll have them join the foot soldiers. With all that was planned so far, it was all they could do. It would be a waste of firepower if we did that. The man walked up to the map and traced a line of where one of the narrow passage walls would be. Instead of having them join the foot soldiers, we build two battlements on each side of the pass. We can post a good amount of our archers there that can destroy some of the dead as they try to get through. He moved his hand to over where the infantry lines would be. We could build another behind the infantry lines and provide volley attacks against the oncoming horde. We should also station men atop the wall that doesn't collapse. Another man said, if the Night King will be occupied fighting 2 dragons, then there should post some men where they cannot be reached. Do we know how many archers we have? The final count was 18,000. A Maester informed. And how many are stationed where depends on how big the gap is made. We have women and children fighting with us. Lord Glover said, we should put them on the wall where they'll be safest. Jon shook his head. The top of the wall isn't the safest place to be. If the Night King is able to get away from me for even a moment, he could attack the wall to try and create a better opening for his soldiers, free of any resistance. We'll post the women and children on the main wall and have them retreat to the ramparts behind the infantry. What was hoped to be a quick discussion turned into nearly an hour of debates and strategy. Many nearly fought over who would be where and whose soldiers should be in a more dangerous position. It kept going back and forth, and many were becoming angered. Whoever was at the front lines would surely die, of course. But if it wasn't for the Grey Worm volunteering the Unsullied to be at the front, no one would have. But even with the strategies and ideas being given, it all rode on how large the gap in the wall would be and how many builders were available. Bringing the discussion to a calm and everyone returning to their seats, Jon took control of the council. My lords, we can't continue further until we build the pass and the barricade. If we're to do this in time, we'll need at least 40,000 men to march in 2 days. 2 days? A Lord of the Reach exclaimed. Most of our troops just finished settling in. Now you want them to just undo their work. We don't have choice. A march to Castle Black would take at least a week, but if the free folk lead the company, they can get there in 5 days. You expect us to let wildlings? I don't give damn about your pride or any fucking conflict you have with the wildlings. You will follow them because I am commanding you to. If you don't want to obey, then pack up your arms, gather your men, ride south and cower with Cersei. Kill the boy, Jon Snow. Kill the boy, and let the man be born. Jon was in no mood for the pride of other men. If they were to live, they would all have to fight together, as men of Westeros, no matter where they were from. The Lord of the Reach shut up, looked defeated and disgraced. Jon let himself calm before going on. We have 2 days to get prepared, and 5 days to get to the wall. If we're going to win this war, we have to take the offensive. There is nothing that can stop the Night King from coming. No defense, no strategy, nothing. That's how he works. He'll corner us at every angle and kill us all. This will be the only way we have to face him head on. And we have to do it together, as army made from every corner of the world we all share. If you can't understand that, then you have no place here, and no place in this army. Jon looked around at the stares the men gave him. They weren't angry or afraid with him. He wasn't sure what this was. Looking through the entrance to the outside, the light of the twilight hour was gone, and the darkness of the evening was taking hold. I'm concluding this meeting. If any of you have any objections, save it tomorrow. We have 2 days, and no more. Now get out and gather your men. The noise of the lords and commanders rustling out of the longhouse sounded like a battle of its own, but they obeyed nonetheless. Only a few people remained inside, being Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, Missandei, Tyrion, Davos, Benjen, Grey Worm, Jorah, Jaime, and Varys. That went better than I expected. Tyrion said. Davos replied. Same here. Now we just have to hope that they are desirable enough to throw their pride and grudges away just to live. They may yet surprise us, Tyrion insisted. The hour grows late. I suggest that we should all retire for the evening. Well said, Lord Tyrion, Daenerys agreed. I give you all this time for yourselves. Please use it, my friends. We won't have it for much longer. Varys left the building with Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei, and Davos. Your Grace, Benon said to Jon, I'll head north with the builders. I'm the only one who can see Bran and Rickon when they use the site, so I can form a quick two-way communication line between us. There's not much I can do here anyways. As you wish, Uncle, Jon replied. Benjen bowed his head and left quickly. Jon looked down at his seat and eyed Blackfire for a moment before picking it up and really looking at it. The Valyrian patterns on the blade were unlike any he'd ever seen, whereas most were ripples or stars. The metal looked like layers of fire where the patterns showed. As interesting as it would be to wield in battle, he already had a sword. Jon looked over to Arya and held it out to her. You take it. Needle was meant for stabbing, and techniques like that are pointless against the dead. You can slash deep with this. Without even questioning Jon, Arya got up from her seat and took it from him. She held it in her hands and gave a few swings to get a feel for it. Give me 2 weeks to practice, and I'll be ready. It's a shame, Rickon said, all eyes turning to him as he rested his hand on the handle of Snow and stroked the pommel with his thumb. I have a Valyrian sword and I won't be able to use it in the battle. I'll teach everything I can, little brother, Jon told him, but Rickon just shook his head at him. A month is nothing compared to years of training. Snow should be carried into the fray of battle by a knight, a northern knight. Rickon began to undo his sword belt and wrapped it around the scabbard. He walked up to Ser Jorah and offered the sword to him. You should take it. My lord, Ser Jorah said. Snow is yours, the sword of House Stark. The Stark should carry it into battle. Your father gave Jon the sword of House Mormont, and you let him keep it. A Stark will lead the armies wielding a Mormont sword, and a Mormont will fight for him, wielding a Stark sword. Take it, but I'll be wanting it back. Rickon pushed the sword closer to Jorah, forcing the Bear Knight to take it from him. Use it well, come on, Ghost. Rickon patted his leg and Ghost got up from the floor and followed him outside. Jon walked over to Daenerys and offered his hand to her. Still hold on to the egg, she took his hand and intertwined arms and walked out of the longhouse together. Everyone else following after them. As they walked through the camp, Daenerys stopped. Jon, she said, looking up to him. I want to see the dragons before we sleep. I was about to say the same. They broke off from the others and changed course to the location of the dragon's nesting area. Jon was curious to their reaction when they would see a new dragon egg. They showed certain emotions from time to time, but very few. All Jon had to do was warg into them to feel it, though he hadn't done that in quite some time, given how busy he was, but a part of him longed to do it. It was how he could speak with his dragons and hear their feelings. The two of them exited the camp and crossed the road over to the side that the dragons claimed. The creatures of fire lifted their heads up when they sensed the approach of their mother and father. Eurys was the only one who got up from lying down and approached the two of them. She seemed to purr and growl at the same time when she got close to them. Daenerys let go of Jon's arm so he could pet Eurys overhead. She always wanted his attention more than Recalgal did, and he was Jon's mount. Eurys looked over to Daenerys and saw the egg in her arms. She let out a small growl that caught the attention of the other dragons. The rest of them got up from resting and approached Daenerys to see what she held. If Jon had to guess, he thought that the dragons were happy to see the egg, but he didn't need to. He warged into the 4 dragons and heard different thoughts through each of them. A child from stone to fire and flesh, Lyras felt. Red is power that destroys, Drogon felt. Fire and blood, Rhaegal felt. A 4th child, Ygritte felt. Jon warged out of the dragons and received a small headache. Drogon snorted a small puff of smoke from his nostrils and returned to where he was resting. The other dragons following after him. Before Jon could gather his thoughts, Daenerys grabbed onto his hand. Jon, do you remember the first person you ever killed? Jon was curious as to where this question came from. It was very out of the blue, and there wasn't much that could spark the desire to ask such a thing. I do. I killed a brother of the Watch who was turned into a white. That's how I earned Longclaw. He remembered how proud he was when Jair Mormont gave him the sword and when he showed it off to all of his brothers. I meant living, Jon. Jon's pride died when she clarified. He would never forget the first man he ever killed and how ashamed he was when he did it. It was another brother of the Watch. Kieran Halfhand. Why? Was he a deserter? No, he was a man I greatly admired. But why did you kill him? Jon didn't want to say, but something in him said that she needed to know. It was during the great ranging beyond the wall. We were both captured by the wildlings and taken prisoner. But in order for me to gain their trust, he called me a traitor and made me kill him." Her grip tightened around his fingers as her gaze fell to the ground. "Was that when you realized it?" "What? You don't enjoy what you're good at?" Jon silently nodded. "Yes." Daenerys turned her head to look at him. "Could you promise me something?" "Of course, what is it?" Daenerys was hesitant to tell him and looked sad to do so. "When the battle begins and you see the Night King riding Viserion, please try to end it quickly." "I was already planning it that way." "No, I don't mean that. I meant when the time comes to—" She couldn't bring herself to say the last bit, but she didn't need to.
Viserion died beyond the wall.
"Daenerys, what he is now is just a puppet, a tool that suffers under control. I won't kill him. I'll set him free from his prison." Jon wrapped his arms around Daenerys and held her tightly, burying her face into his chest. "When I saw you as one of them, my heart broke 1,000 times over. I don't want to see one of my children like that." She looked up to his eyes on the verge of tears. "What I'm trying to say is, don't make it painful." Jon leaned his head down and kissed her warmly, reassuring her that everything would be all right. He let them stay this way for a moment, wanting it to become one they would remember. "Come on," he said, as he loosened his embrace around her. "Let's go home." She gently smiled him as they walked back to the castle together. "Groof. Damn it, Harry, we can't stay here." Jon shouted at his captain in the cellars of the Red Keep, surrounded by dozens of dragon skulls. The only light in the darkness came from 2 torches they had each brought. "If we can't go back to Essos, we should join the fight in the north. No matter who the victor is, we'll lose if we stay here. We are providing the north with the dragon glass, and we gave them Jaime Lannister and the egg. As long as we remain in the city, the Targaryens won't use their dragons against us. Their love for the people is too great to risk so much innocent death. And even if they do, they'll find the city riddled with hundreds of scorpions to shoot them out of the sky." Harry was forever adamant on remaining loyal to Cersei. He was not going to let the Golden Company break its largest contract. But for Jon, it wasn't about the gold anymore, or his loyalty to the Targaryens. It was just about surviving. And what if Cersei decides to blow up the city? Are we to die in it with every other beggar and highborn shit? We're mercenaries. We're paid to fight and die. Nothing was ever simpler than that. Jon wanted to punch him as hard as he could, or anything for that matter, but he controlled himself to contain his rage. He felt like he was the only one with common sense. It wasn't even just the wildfire that was going to kill them now, but also starvation, riots, and sickness. The food stores only have 2 days of food left in them, and once there was no more food, the citizens would begin to kill each other for whatever they could get to eat. And once dead bodies begin to pile up in the streets, the rotting flesh will give birth to disease and plagues.
"You doubt we can win?"
There was no question of doubt. It was an undeniable truth. Aegon the Conqueror had nowhere near the numbers the king and queen had, and won. If we continue to just sit here and do nothing, then we won't even be alive when they get here. Once we're out of food, then what? We eat dirt? We all might as well be as mad as the queen is. I'm surprised to hear this coming from a man who fought for the Mad King before his exile. I fought for Rhaegar, not Aerys. I would never fight for Aerys, and I won't fight for a woman who's feasting on wine while her people hunger. My old friend, do you really think the queen would let us all starve? She's willing to burn us alive, so yes, I do. Tell me, where does the most food for the winter come from? The Reach, of course. There was also the Riverlands, but they only gave out half of what the Reach was able to. And where are the armies to protect their grain now? It then hit Jon in a wave. Cersei was going to let the armies go all along. Now that there was no one to protect the food or the people, it wouldn't be hard, or take very long. The only lives that would be lost were the innocent ones. It doesn't matter, even without their dragons, and if they lost half of their forces, they'll outnumber us 4-1. Not for long. The Westerlands won't continue to serve under the Targaryens, and Dorne is planning on staying out of the war after the fight with the dead. Well, wonderful. Now it will only be 3-1. We'll have the elephants. They're just as tall as their giants, but far more dangerous. The Dothraki and their horses won't stand a chance against them, and we'll have some reinforcements. Reinforcements? What do you mean? Do you really think Euron Greyjoy tucked tail and ran away? He's bringing with him a fleet of pirates to destroy the Iron Fleet at sea. He only lost to his nephew on land, but he is the storm of the ocean. That doesn't change at all that he lost the support of the Ironborn. It will be 900 ships against 300 at the most. Euron may be a better captain, but he can't defeat the Iron Fleet. If the Targaryens don't use their dragons to attack the city, they'll attack his fleet of pirates and sink them as fast as they did at Pike. Enough! Harry grabbed Euron by his collar and pulled him close. I would have us all return home if I could. I would kill the Queen myself if she dared to use the wildfire while we're in its path of death. I would stop at nothing to avenge my men. Harry was an honorable man and never turned on any of his employers. But if Cersei allowed his men to die by her hand, then the contract between them would be broken and he would have nothing stopping him from killing her. I will not become a turncloak to my contractor. I would let the whole world call me coward if it meant saving you, but I will not stoop to her level and kill those I have sworn to ally with. Harry let go of Jon's collar and placed his fingers on a pin with 3 skulls that was over Jon's breast. He felt it lightly before yanking it off and tossing it away. It disappeared into the darkness, and the only thing left of it was a small ringing it made when it landed in the dirt somewhere. If you want to fight with the dragons so much, then so be it. But if I see you in the days after tomorrow, I'll kill you. Harry grabbed onto a torch that was lodged in the ground and left Jon in the cellar of the Red Keep with the dragon skulls. Jon took a few steps back until was leaning on a large skull behind him. He sank to the ground and sat in the light, surrounded by nothing but shadows and skulls. He turned his head to gaze at the one he sat against. The sheer presence of it reminded him of Rhaegar in battle. He was unstoppable, but a peaceful-hearted man, his friend, and a man who died against another's rage. Jon became filled with determination to not disgrace himself to the memory of his friend. He would fight for his son and sister, and he would die for them. In the evening alleys of Flea Bottom, Jon had hidden himself and some of the other men where hopefully no little birds would hear their whispers. Those gathered with him were only a few group of 5, but all served with him in the usurpers' rebellion. They carried no torches with them, only the light of the moon and the white of the snows in the city guided their way. There's not much we can do, Jon told them, but we can still do something, if not anything. But the sure thing is, we're going north to fight with the rightful king and queen. All of the men with him nodded, confirming their loyalty was in the same place. Will Cole, a man with a ginger beard to match his long hair and one missing eye, sat over a wooden crate while considering their options. Altogether, there's about 200 of us remaining from the rebellion. It will hardly be anything, but we can slip out of the city unnoticed and head north with anyone looking our way. Rolly Duckfield, one of the younger of the men present, shook his head to the idea. I think only Jon and a handful of others should head north. The rest of us should stay here and try to clear out the wild affray. He's the only one Harry knows to be leaving, so we'll be safe from any suspicion. In a city such as this, Jon said, with over 1 million people, 200 is too many, who don't belong to be spotted by those damn little birds. They'll know something is happening, and who knows if there are sentries below the city. We can only leave 10 men behind. Only 10, Raleigh quietly exclaimed. It would take years for 10 men to get all of the wildfire out from under the city. There's one inevitable thing we may have to accept. No matter what happens, the stores of wildfire will be ignited. Everyone present in the alley looked grim when they heard the truth of that. We can't save the whole city, but maybe the bits that matter. Everyone looked up to Jon with small sparks of hope in their eyes. This city is nothing more than a jewel that crushes the weak that are forced under it. The king and queen won't care about the jewel more than the people. Jon turned his gaze to Raleigh. You'll remain here with 9 others, and work as best you can to clear out the areas that belong to the people, not the powerful. Do not grow a single worry for the Red Keep. That place is nothing to them compared to the lives of their people. Raleigh nodded at him, knowing his task. The rest of us will gather the rest of exiles and leave the city, but we won't be going north just yet. What do you mean? Loramus Mudd asked. Where else is there to go? Doran, we'll steal some of the elephants and bring them with us, to battle against the dead. Smart move, weaken Cersei by strengthening the Targaryens. But I want you and Cole to go with an escort of 4 others, to the north as messengers, to the king and queen, informing them of our allegiance and warning them of Euron Greyjoy. It shall be done. Loramus nodded with Cole. Franklin, Humphrey, you 2 will join me south to retrieve the elephants. The 2 of them nodded at the idea. We don't have much time. I want us out of the city before dawn. Otherwise we'll have to wait for the cover of darkness tomorrow, and who knows if we'll last that long after now. They all dispersed from the alley, and into the night of the city, set out to fulfill their duties given by Jon, but they were unaware that no matter where they were, no whisper was safe. The night blue of the skies was starting to brighten ever so little by the time all were gathered. While the bulk of the men were at the stables preparing the horses, Jon and those he met with along with several other men gathered under the roof. Leaving the city would be easy, since the Golden Company was tasked with assisting in hunting for livestock. They all gathered around the light of a lantern and viewed a map of Westeros. The elephants are all located at Hellgate Hall. We'll take 100 of them and head for Starfall. Luramus, Cole. The two of them met Jon's gaze. The Dornish armies were ferried by the Ironborn. When you get to Winterfell, you need to tell them to send ships to Starfall to ferry us to Torrhen Square. We can't bring them by land with the Reach about to be plundered by the rest of the company. They both nodded to him, understanding their duties. The rest of us will leave the city in packs of 20. Ride hard, and stay cautious. The snows are still light, so, if all goes well, we should get there in about 4 days' time. Jon rolled up the map and slid it in his belt. Let's get moving. The men gathered around all went to gather their squads and prepare them to leave, save Raleigh who would see everyone off. Jon stood next to him and watched as men swiftly left out of the city, without a second look from the gold cloaks. If you live through the war, Raleigh said, what do you plan to do? Jon had always wondered what he would do when he returned to Westeros. But when he did, everything changed when he learned that Rhaegar had a true-born son who would rise up to be king. I think I'll go home first. I miss my family and want to see them again. The last of the men were getting ready and Jon was the one to lead them south. He faced Raleigh and gave him a brotherly embrace. I wish you good fortunes in the wars to come. And to you, they let go of each other. And Jon mounted his horse. He led his men past the giant doors, and they were soon closed behind them. And thus began their journey out of the hell that took a city as its form, and to its gates in Dorne. The choice of using Hellgate to house the elephants was the only choice the Golden Company had. The castle was long abandoned and empty. Streams of water that led to the river were not far from it, and plants grew all along the banks to provide feed for the beasts, and it was south enough that on days that it snowed it would all melt before nightfall. The only concern that the men stationed there had was the smell of the Brimstone River that was carried 10 miles to the castle. The waters of it stank like bad eggs and would cause the mightiest of men to be trapped on a privy for days if they drank them. Jon had once heard a story of a merchant that was traveling to the coast on night by following a road on the side of the river. His wagon broke down and some of his goods fell into the water. He lit a torch to look for his things in the river, but a bit of the oil of the torch dripped into the water. When the flame touched the surface, the water exploded and there was nothing left except for a broken-down wagon filled with charcoal and other minerals of earth. Hellgate Hall was once a great fortress that was the seat for the kings of Brimstone, but now it was an eroding mountain of rubble. The castle was carved out of a small mountain that rose from the valley and a tower out of a peak of rock next to it. The bridge that connected the two had collapsed long ago, and the contents inside remained untouched. The tower served as a treasury for the castle, and rumors about an armored coat of dragon scales was said to be inside, but no one cared enough to try and find out or restore the castle. Hills of dirt and sand obscured the castle constantly as Jon and his small army grew closer to claiming what support they could for the Targaryens. Jon even planned on recruiting the last of their supporters that were at Hellgate Hall. It wouldn't be much considering only 500 men were stationed there and only 20 would be likely to join, but every little bit would help. The pungent odor of the brimstone slowed the pace of the horses and the men. The smell made one want to breathe deeper, as if trying to find any clean air through the stink, and despite absolutely no clouds or snow that day, the temperature was chilly, and it was going to get colder as the sun was beginning to rest on the mountains in the horizon. The heat of its light burned cold that day, and the sky was a red that some took as an omen of evil. It wasn't an unbelievable thing, since Cersei was the one on the Iron Throne. The Targaryen loyalists halted as they came within a mile of the castle. As they scanned through the camp, just outside of the walls, Jon took notice to an important detail, as did everyone else. Franklin Flowers rode his horse next to Jon's. Where are the elephants? I don't know. There wasn't a single one in sight. The path of their tracks could be seen around the castle and led behind the mountain of the castle. There were campfires and lights within the castle, indicating that the Golden Company was still there. Take Humphrey and all but 10 of the men around the mountain and follow the tracks. If anyone asks what we're doing here, say that we've been sent to inspect the condition of the herd before they travel." Franklin nodded and rode over to Humphrey, relaying what Jon told him. The two of them resumed the gallop towards the castle, with the majority of those that followed, but steered to the tracks. Jon took his group and went straight for the castle, but he couldn't shake the feeling he had in his heart that something was amiss. As they got closer to the castle, a small host of men could be seen forming at the camp, most likely to greet them. Jon forgot all about the stank in the air as they rode up to the men and halted. "Greetings," the man at the head of the group said. "We weren't expecting anyone today." He had a smug look his face that made Jon irritated to see. "Captain Strickland wants the elephants to be checked. They'll be heading to King's Landing soon, but the captain wants to see how well they'll fare on the lands with snow." "Why didn't you send a raven?" "Surprise inspection, Captain Strickland." Strickland wanted to make sure the care of the elephants wasn't being neglected, and it seems that he may have been right since there's not a single one in sight. The man scoffed at Jon. "We haven't neglected anything. The herd is kept on the side of the mountain that gets the most sun. We've already had a dozen of them succumb to sickness." "Fair enough. Where's Commander Balak?" "He's in the castle. We'll take you to him." Jon eyed the man for a moment, before nodding to his men. They dismounted their horses, and let the other men of the Golden Company take the reins. They followed the leader into the encampment, and past many men who sat outside their tents and around their fires, being merry and playfully fighting one another as if boasting of battles they fought. Jon even saw some men reenacting a merciless kill in a mocking manner. "You all seem in high spirits tonight," Jon said. "With the Dornish armies gone, we can finally get out of this egg-smelling desert and go back to killing. But we got a taste of that already, a couple of days ago, with a few fools who thought they stood a chance against us. Well, no wonder. We haven't had a single battle since we got here. Maybe you should have been the ones to send a raven, so we could have joined you." The leader chuckled a bit as they entered through the gates of Hellgate Hall. Inside, the men weren't as joyful as the men outside. They looked more serious and battle-hardened. "What's with them? There's fools were they ones, who missed the battle." They were approached a small group of men, who were cleaning their battle axes. Jon took notice of a cloth at the side of a man who was sitting down. It was stained red with blood. If they missed the battle, why would they have blood-stained rags? One of the men who was definitely an usse stood up and collided with Jon. "Watch it," Jon advised. The man turned to face Jon and looked as if Jon was his mortal enemy. He just scoffed at him and brushed the wrinkles out of his shirt. In that instant, Jon could see a part of a tattoo the man had. 2 crossed axes behind the head of a feline of some kind. Before he resumed walking, Jon took another look at the man and remembered that there was another usse company that had a banner like that. 2 crossed axes behind the head of a cat. The company of the cat. Jon looked around at all the other men inside the castle, and realized some of them wore the armor of the Golden Company, but there was battle damage, and it was recent. He halted with his men and crept his hand over the hilt of his sword. "What did you say your name was again?" The leader of the escort turned and saw what Jon was doing. Merely smiled at him. "I never did." He grinned at them, before whistling to the area around them. All of the men surrounding the area got up and brandished their weapons. "Ambush!" Jon drew his scimitar and his men drew their swords with him. The leader of the escort took a few steps back, and axe wielder take his place. He raised his axe and stepped forward to land a swing on Jon. But having faced this kind of opponent before, Jon stepped forward and stooped the swing of the axe before swinging his scimitar up and slashed it into the man's face. Behind him, Jon saved one of his men from another axe and killed the attack by decapitating him. But before Jon could prepare himself for his next opponent, something was knocked hard on the back of his head, and the next thing he realized what blacking out. It didn't take long for him to regain consciousness and wake up. His vision was dazed, but he could tell that he was being dragged along the ground. He was soon dropped and slowly pushed himself up to look around. He was on the other side of the mountain, facing it, and the leader of his escort. "I have a message from your captain. 270 men is nothing compared to 30,000. He waved his hand to what was behind Jon, gesturing him to look. Jon got to his feet and turned around, all hope leaving him when he saw the bodies of all the loyalists before him, decapitating and bloodied. Beyond the bodies was a whole army of men and horses. He could make out banners with sigils of more than 12 different mercenary companies. The Storm Crows, Windblown, Langlances, Iron Shields, almost every company there was in Essos was now in Westeros. Jon fell to his knees in despair as the leader walked in front of him, inspecting his septon tor, a golden griffin. I prefer golden women. He tossed it aside and drew an arag from his side as placed the edge of the blade on Jon's neck. Jon closed his eyes as the leader raised the sword up, preparing to swing it down. Fire and blood, the last words Jon said before the song of steel cutting through wind met him at his neck. Daenerys. Despite the danger that was coming for the world, Daenerys didn't let that stop her from enjoying her time in Winterfell and her bath. While Jon was currently organizing a few of the commanders before they would depart, and all that kept her from joining him was the lack of clothes that fit. Her belly increased in its swell enough that her current wardrobe was too tight. Sansa was kind enough to begin working on something new for her and resize her other clothes. Missandei ran her hands through Daenerys' platinum hair, always feeling smoother than silk. The length of it was growing at a fine rate that she could soon be able to return to her old style, but she was enjoying what she had done. All 4 of her rings were resting on a table in front of the pillow that held her crown, but she had recently decided that it was time for one more for breaking the witch's curse. Daenerys held the red egg in the steaming water up against her belly, while Missandei did her work. She wondered what kind of dragon would hatch from inside. Would it be ferocious and powerful like Drogon, or timid and quiet like Laeris? Whatever kind it would be, it would belong to her child after her sons, since they would take Ygritte and Laeris. She suddenly came to the realization of how casually she was thinking of the future. It made her happy that she did without any worry of anything in the way of it. But also concerned, she couldn't let anything get in her way of attaining that possibility. And she wouldn't. Not Cersei. Not the Night King. No one. Wanting to get out of the thoughts of what will be, Daenerys wanted to focus on the things that currently are. Missandei, how have you taken your time here in the north? It's an interesting place, Your Grace. Not as extravagant as the cities in Essos, but more peaceful. I just wish I could see it when there isn't an army outside the walls, and everyone isn't working, because their lives depend on it. Daenerys only had a few days to see what that was like when she first arrived in Winterfell. It felt like what the world would be if she could make it that way. You will see it, I promise you. I'm just glad to back with Grey Worm even as little as the time we have is. He's off drilling with the soldiers using their new spears. The spears they have are the best in the world, against the dead. Dragonglass heads attached to ironwood shafts. The wood was as strong as iron and was perfect for crafting. Only foresters of Iron Wrath knew how to lumber the wood.
I've seen you spend time with one of the Wilders free folk.
Jon had asked her to try and start showing respect to them for who they are instead of what others made them to be. Care to explain why that is? His name is Kulik. He's a warg, and he speaks the language of the giants, or the old tongue as it's called. I've asked him to teach it to me. I've only learned a few phrases though. Some of them are not the best of words to say in conversation, but if I'm to learn, I must know all of what the language is. Daenerys lifted the egg out of the water and handed it to Missandei. The water evaporated before it could drip to the ground, yet the egg didn't feel hot at all. She placed it on an orange pillow in between where the crowns were, and retrieved a robe for Daenerys. It was all she could wear, until Sansa was done. Though I must say, Missandei said as Daenerys rose from the water and stepped out of the tub. Watching his eyes turn into that white nothing when he connects with his owl scares me a little. I understand what you mean. Daenerys guided her arms into the sleeves of the robe, and gently tied it around her. Whenever I see Jon or Bran in that state, it's like their soul has left them completely, and they're nothing but a living shell. She placed a hand over her belly, thinking of when her son shared his visions with her. But powers like that will be essential to winning the wars. It seems everything these days are for winning the wars to come. When all is won, what to use them for? Daenerys turned to face Missandei, giving her a comforting smile. We rebuild what was lost in all of our chaos. And then when that's done, we keep on building, for our children, and their children, and for all who will walk the earth when we are far gone from it. After that we can only leave what we've already given. In the end it was all about legacy. Daenerys couldn't help but wonder what hers would be. A conqueror like Aegon, or a savior like she wanted to be. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Missandei walked over to it and checked to see who it was. Lady Sansa. Missandei opened the door fully, and Sansa entered, carrying with her Daenerys' new dress. Your Grace, Sansa said. I hope you like what I've made. Sansa laid the dress on the bed so it was in full view of the three of them. It was hooded, and the main color was a dark gray, with the red Targaryen dragon flying in a dance around the torso. On the left side of it was an outline of a white direwolf, as if it was a ghost. The cuffs, hood, and collar were lined with black fur, and the sleeves had a stitching of red in the pattern of dragon scales. And most importantly, it would fit Daenerys comfortably for now. It's absolutely beautiful, Daenerys commented as she felt the texture of the sleeves. I can't thank you enough for this. The other seamstresses finished the rest of your gowns. You could say that this is a belated wedding gift from me to you, and I've heard whispers from others that it will only be one of many. One of many? Daenerys inquired. Sansa merely smiled at he, before leaving the room, and Daenerys in wondering of what she was planning. Daenerys turned and looked at Missandei. Do you know if someone is planning something? Missandei just smiled at her. I know nothing, Your Grace. Daenerys rolled her eyes and undid the strap around her robe, preparing to dress into her new gown. Outside of Winterfell, Jon was waiting nearby the dragons, as Daenerys and Missandei, escorted by Ser Jorah, trudged to them in the snow. Jon turned around when she got the attention of the dragons, and he looked amazed at her. He walked up to her, and without warning, kissed her. Sorry, he said as he leaned back to look at her, but too beautiful to resist. Daenerys slapped him in his shoulder. No amount of flattery in the world will win me over. Then it's a good thing I married you. They two of them shared a laugh together before Jon took Daenerys' hand and walked with her to Drogon.
Your Grace, Jorah said, are you sure you don't want me to accompany you?
There may be those among the builders who are still loyal to Cersei. He has a point, Jon said. We may only be gone for a day, but a lot can happen between now and when we return. There may be those die-heartedly loyal to Cersei and think of doing something incredibly stupid. It wasn't false that even though the realms were united, they were still looking at each other as the other's enemy. If it helps extinguish any danger you feel will befall upon us, then you'll ride with Jon. Thank you, Your Grace. Jorah gave a slight bow to Missandei as the three of them departed from her presence and into that of the dragons. Drogon stirred a little bit before lowering his body as close to the ground as possible. Both Jon and Jorah had to assist her onto his back. By the time she got on top of her dragon, Daenerys felt out of breath. Jon, I don't think I'll be fit enough to ride after the war with the dead. Not only would she be unable to fly, but getting onto Drogon itself would be impossible. I don't think you will either. We'll talk about what to do when we get to the wall. Daenerys waited for Jon and Jorah to get onto Rhaegal's back. She decided to let Jon do the honors of taking them to the skies. He wasn't fluent in High Valyrian, but she had taught him enough to command the dragons without warging. Valerid, all four of the dragons rustled in their places before Rhaegal shot off the ground first, followed by Drogon but much slower. Rhaegar and Lyras followed closely behind as Winterfell and the entire camp below them began to shrink. They all banked around the lands below them before changing their course to the north, to Castle Black. The ride was 6 hours until the wall was barely visible. The only thing that made it noticeable was the small darkened gathering of builders camped 2 miles away from it. As they all got closer, Daenerys became marveled at the great structure. She had seen it in visions before, but seeing it in person gave it an entirely different gravity of presence. The dragons circled around in the air as they soared above the encampment of 50,000 men. Jorah was the only one to dismount when they landed, and before they were going to do what they came here for, Jon had to have a few words with his uncle. She and Drogon were just close enough to listen in on the quick conversation. Anything to report? Jon asked. We've had some of the wargs that came with us scouting 100 miles north from the air. Benjen told him, there's no sign of the dead approaching yet, but when they come into sight, we'll blow one blast. When the storm that follows can seen from here, 2 blasts, and when they leave the edge of the haunted forest, 3 blasts. Bran's been keeping his vision on the army itself, and he'll inform us when we're running out of time. Are the men ready? As they'll ever be. Then, let's bring down the wall. Benjen stepped away from Rhaegal before the dragons took to the skies again. The 4 of them took a quick lap next to the towering ice before gathering next to one another and hovering in front of the wall. Daenerys couldn't help but feel nervous about this. The wall was the only thing that kept the dead from marching south for thousands of years. Even though it was useless to have now that the Night King had Viserion, there was still a feeling of protection that resonated from the wall. She shook her head, ridding her mind of doubtful thought, and looked over to Jon, nodding at him that she was ready. Even from where she was, she could see his eyes turn the shade of white, like the clouds above, and the eyes of the dragons did the same for a brief moment. Drogon's body began to gather heat beneath her, and all four of the dragons unleashed their fury upon the wall. When the dragon fire impacted with the ice, there was a brief gust that erupted, powerful enough that Daenerys had to tighten her grip on Drogon, until it passed. Large pieces of ice began to crumble and fall down to the ground. Some of the pieces fell hard onto Castle Black, and began to destroy the structure. Yrys and Lyrys suddenly ceased, and parted from Drogon and Rhaegal. They began to resume breathing fire at the wall, but in blasts as the maid passes at the lower parts of it, the wall began to deeply crack and sounded like an avalanche as larger pieces of ice broke off. The earth beneath was beginning to quake as if the ground itself was about to crack open and swallow the world whole. It didn't take long for Drogon and Rhaegal's fire to burst through to the other side of the wall, and when it did, the top began to cave in and more of it followed. The two of them changed their positions and targets to keep the wall falling into itself, but hopefully not too much. Finally, glaciers of ice crumbled and crashed to the ground, completely destroying Castle Black and exploding into a noise so loud it could be heard around the world. This was when the dragons all stopped and let the wall do the work for them. The collapsing region above Castle Black cast a domino effect and continued to bring down everything at both sides. White clouds of frost, snow, and ice formed at the ground where the ice collapsed and shattered. The collapse finally came to a stop, and a gap nearly 1.5 miles wide was made. Jon came out of his estranged state, and all of the dragons departed from over the wreckage to return to the camp. When they landed, it was clearly visible that the shockwaves were powerful enough to cause a bit of destruction in the camp. Some of the tents were knocked down, many of the men were climbing out of the snow after falling in, and even a few wagons had broken. After Jon and Daenerys both dismounted, Benjen and Jorah both approached them. Despite the chaos that just occurred, Benjen said, "That was amazing to witness." Jorah nodded with him. Hundreds of years of work, all gone in a few minutes. And now, a month's worth of work, all for just one night. Benjen looked out to the wreckage, one last time. "I'll see to it that we're ready to begin work within an hour. If you need me, we'll have a few tents down there to oversee the plans, if anything changes." Benjen turned his head and looked at an empty space. "What?" Daenerys became confused. Maybe he thought he heard something. "Then you'd better quit wasting your time here and spend it with the girl, nephew. Now go." "I beg your pardon," Daenerys said, "but who were you talking to?" "Grenn," Benjen stated. Daenerys sighed and shook her head to the ground. "That's all I need to hear. There were too many things to try and understand, all of the powers that were in the presence in the armies. Most of them being from the north. We have a tent set up for you in the center of the camp until you leave tomorrow. I can't say you'll enjoy your time here, but there are worse places to be." Benjen bowed his head to Jon and Daenerys before departing from them. Daenerys took Jon's arm and walked with him into the encampment, Jorah following closely. "Did you hear what your uncle said about a girl? Was he talking about your sisters?" "I don't think so," Jon told her. "He sounded too playful about it, and he would have said Sansa or Arya by name." "Then who was he talking about?" "I only know of one girl that Bran knows, who isn't as Stark. Meera." Ever since her arrival, Meera had done nothing but drill with her father, and the other Crannogmen with their new dragonglass spears. They were much finer quality than the ones the children of the forest used in the cave of the three-eyed raven. But aside from that, her father also trained her better to use a sword. She had the strength to wield one beyond the wall, but her skill wasn't as good as she wanted it. The two of them were in the camps at a large practice yard that was basically just an unoccupied area of land. It was so large that there were thousands of others doing their own training as well. Meera had just failed to parry a strike from her father, and he managed to lightly slash over her chest. "Nope," he told her, "you let the strength of the block move into the follow-up too quickly. Don't return the attack unless you know you can go on the offensive." Meera nodded to him as she regained her breath and took her stance. Her father took the first swings and Meera blocked them better than she previously. This time she did a proper parry and managed to poke her father in the chest with the end of her sparring sword. "Much better." Meera pulled her sword away and took a moment to catch her breath. But when she let her guards down, Howland surprised her and struck at her body twice before she reacted. Dead, he told her. She became frustrated that he did that without warning, but the dead wouldn't be as kind as to let everyone take a break after every kill. I'm sorry, father. You look distracted, Mira. Howland began walking with Mira over to a large canopy that stood over an armory of practice weapons, protecting them from the snow. I'm just tired. We've been at this for since morning. The two of them placed their weapons on a sword rack and retrieved their own. Your voice says one thing, but the look in your eyes says another. They left the shade of the canopy and began to make their way to the castle, passing many others making preparations for the march north. Tell me what's troubling you. There's nothing troubling me. I just don't like being here. Well, that's a first. Howland chuckled as he spoke. I remember a little girl who once told me that all she ever wanted to do was see the great castle of Winterfell, and she kept saying that right until the day came that she and her brother left the Grey Water. That was when Jojen was still alive, before everyone started dying so a boy could have magic lessons with an old man in a tree. Aye, that's precisely what they died for. Jojen knew that, and so did you. But that's not the real reason you're upset, is it? Howland stopped in his tracks so he could face Mira. Have you gone to see Bran since we returned? Mira had a sudden flashback to when she said goodbye to him, and the sad realization she had. Don't be ridiculous, Bran died in that cave. The person who calls himself the Three-Eyed Raven isn't Bran. Howland sighed at her as they resumed their walk. Mira, I know little when it comes to the sight, but I do know that Bran is the way he is, because of the mistake he made, and what he and the one before him had to do to correct such a thing. To have the entirety of time rush through your eyes, it's incomprehensible to imagine. But he'll return to who he was one day. The more time he spends seeing through the weirwoods, the more he pieces himself back together. Before they entered through the gates, the ground beneath them began to shake so much that Howland lost his footing and slipped into the snow-covered road. The tremors only lasted for a few seconds and ceased completely. What was that? Mira exclaimed as she helped her father up. I think that was the wall. Howland brushed the snow off of his body and adjusted his cloak. A feeling of familiar fear rushed through Mira's spine. She felt the same as she did in the cave when the warmth disappeared, and she saw her breaths turning into the faint clouds of frozen air. That was when all sense of safety left her, and it felt like she was on the border that was just before that dread. Come, Howland told her. I think you should have a talk with someone, as led her through the castle and to the entrance of the Godswood. Father, I don't want to. He placed his hands firmly on her shoulders and looked at her dead in the eyes. He's already changed from when I first saw him. You just have to have two things, patience and faith. Mira wasn't sure if she would be able to. She was afraid that when she saw him, Bran would be the same person who felt nothing when she left. Her father left her at the entrance to return to the camp's training yard. She looked into the Godswood and could see the white bark and the red leaves of the weirwood. She didn't want to go in, but she also didn't want to leave. Mira took a deep breath before stepping into the Godswood, feeling the same magical presence that was in the cave of the Three-Eyed Raven. As she walked through a few other trees, Bran came into sight. One of his hands was on the face of the weirwood, and his eyes were the white of a ward's. She stood in front of Bran and took a moment to just look at him. She hadn't seen him in months, but he didn't look different at all. His hair was the same, his face, his size. It gave her comfort to know that at least some things about him didn't change. Bran's eyes returned to the natural color, and he looked up to her. Neither of them said anything to each other for a moment, before Bran actually grew a small smile to Mira. Hello, Mira. Hello, Bran. She didn't notice anything different about his personality yet, but she would listen to her father and try patience, but not yet faith. Were you watching the wall? I was. The dragons brought it down with hardly any effort at all. But the gap they made is a bit bigger than we hoped for. We felt it crash all the way from here. All of Westeros will. It will be the sign that the end is drawing closer to everyone. But we'll be there to stop it. You think we can? I know it. We have the numbers, the weapons, and a reason to keep living. Mira had a spark of hope flash within her when she heard the way he talked. It wasn't so monotone or lack of emotion as it was before, but only by a little. So what's your reason to keep living? I'm the Three-Eyed Raven. My reason is unknown even to me. My purpose for No is to combat against the power of the Night King. But after that, I don't know.
Mira understood what her father meant by Bran's change now.
He beginning to feel like a human, rather than whatever it was that woke up from hours of using the sight when they escaped, the whites from the cave. But for her, it wasn't enough yet. I need to get back to practice, Bran. If it wouldn't trouble you, could you send for Rickon to come and get me? Mira nodded at him before turning to walk away. I'm sorry, he said. Mira turned her head, confused. At what? That I can't be who you want me to be right now. Mira smiled at him sympathetically. I have faith you will be one day. Edric. In the years past, Edric had seen only one other winter, and it was like a beautiful spring in Dorne. Never before has he ever seen so much snow or a storm such as what was happening. The winds were keen and light, but the snow was thick and heavy. It began late in the night, and more than 2 feet had fallen by the afternoon of the day that followed. The only ones who didn't mind it were the Northerners and the dragons, since their bodies were like furnaces. When Edric awoke that morning, he was chilled to the bone in his tent, and would have frozen had it not been for the heavy cloak Lady Sansa had made for him. Though whenever he wore it, it felt like he had his 2-year-old son growled on his shoulders. To make things worse to start his day, someone had mistaken the entrance of his tent for a wall, and there was a large pile of shoveled snow leaking inside. Things began to calm down as the day pressed on, but almost everyone had a shovel or something they could use to clear out the fallen snow. No one had any idea what to do with it when the piles began to turn into mountains. But then the wildlings solved that issue by instructing everyone to use the snow to pack a layer of it outside of the wooden huts. Such a technique actually kept heat inside the structure, and all of the horses needed all they could get since many were on the verge of sickness. Many of the children got carried away and made snow castles to battle in a mighty of war of snowball fights. Everyone let them be, since the sight of it was actually uplifting to the men, to see that even though they would all be marching to war very soon, some could still find joy in their moments before then. Edric had just escaped from a snowball massacre he got caught in the middle of, but one of his men was not so lucky. However, it did provide Edric with the opening to escape the company on his men, and gain some privacy in a sense. All around him people were working, but no one was bothering him, which is what he wanted, as selfish as it seemed. Edric got out of the camp and into Winterfell to see if things were any better, in terms of the bustling of people. But they were just as bad in the castle as they were in the camps. Everywhere was loud and there was hardly any room to relax. But through everything, Edric saw there was one place where no one entered or left, which meant that it was empty and free of commotion. Edric made his way through the castle grounds and into a passage that led below ground. The light of outside vanished quickly as he went deeper and was replaced by the light of candles. Edric found himself in a long hallway that extended far out into the darkness with no sign of it ending. He walked slowly down the hallway, taking note to his surroundings and realizing he was in the fabled crypts of Winterfell. As he passed many of the statues, he took a long look at each and every one of them. The further he went down the hallway, the larger a cold feeling in his heart formed. Something about this place made him feel that the statues were looking back at him, as if the ones they represented were judging him from the grave. He stopped when he come upon a statue of the only woman he had seen so far. Her hand reached out and in it was a wilting winter rose. He then realized that this was Lyanna Stark, or rather Lyanna Targaryen. Being in the presence of her began to terrify him so much. He wanted to leave, but he felt a desire to look deeper inside the crypt. Leaving the statue of Lyanna, Edric walked past the statues of Rickard and Brandon Stark, before finding himself looking at the statue of Eddard Stark. He was holding his family's greatsword ice, or at least a simple steel copy of it. The lifeless eyes of stone had a hypnotic effect when Edric looked deep into them. He felt that if he looked long enough, maybe Ned Stark would look back. Lord Dane, a woman's voice said. Edric's body jumped when he became startled, and looked for who the voice belonged to. Lady Stark, Edric regained his posture, and collected himself. Forgive me for startling you. I saw you come down here, and was curious as to why. Edric had a feeling of guilt rush over him when he realized he probably shouldn't be down here at all. It was no wonder that he felt the eyes of the dead judging his presence. Such a place was sacred to those who are of the House Stark. I should be the one apologizing, my lady. I'm probably not welcome in a place such as this. But it was the only place that was quiet. Sansa smiled at him, amused and sympathetic. The tombs of my kin aren't just for those who share blood. Many come down here to pay their respects. You have nothing to be worried over. Ever since he had first arrived in Winterfell, Sansa has always had a noble stature, but never shied away from showing kindness to those who were kind to her. I must disagree with you. Ever since I first came down here, I've had this strange feeling. Like the statues are watching? Edric nodded to her, feeling relieved that he wasn't the first to think that. My father once told me that when we are down here, the great kings of winter kept watch over us all, to keep us safe from the evils outside of the crypt. Knowing that changed Edric's outlook on the mysterious presence he felt. So much that he didn't feel like an outsider in a sacred area any longer. I've heard some stories of the crypt myself. My father once told me that a dragon lives somewhere down here, in a part that has been closed off for hundreds if not thousands of years. Sansa giggled a little at such a bizarre story. I don't know of any dragon lurking in the depths, but not far from here the tunnels come to a collapse. No one's bothered to have it uncovered ever since it happened. Is your father the one who made you so fascinated with the Starks? Yes, it was. Truth be told, there was a time when I actually hated your family, or rather your father. But that was in my coming-of-age years when everything became emotional. I know what you mean, Sansa agreed. What changed your mind? Edric looked back at the statue of Eddard Stark, taking one last look at what form his memory took. I met your father in King's Landing. You did? Well, when I say I met him, I mean I only saw him. How did seeing him change your mind? Edric didn't immediately answer at first. He didn't mind telling Sansa the tale of what happened, but he knew he would feel sad when he would finish. Growing up in Starfall, my family suffered a bit of a small humiliation from the other lords. At feasts I would always overhear someone mocking my Uncle Arthur for being defeated by a savage from the north. I began to grow a hatred for a man I never met, or even knew what he looked like. But the hate was all the same. When I was 11, I began to squire for Beric Dondarrion after my mother passed away. For 3 years he taught me how to be a knight and how to be a lord. Then we heard of King Robert's injury and attended court to serve as we could. I finally was ready to see the man who the other lords boasted about. I was finally going to see what kind of man was able to beat my uncle, the greatest of all the Sword of the Mornings. But then all the despise and anger I had so blindly built had vanished when I saw him, sitting on the Iron Throne in the stead of the king. In his eyes I could see a veil of determination he put over himself, but inside I could see he was sad. Not of court, or ruling, I didn't know what. I still don't. But I saw the kind of man who deserved to be on the throne, a man who didn't take joy in it, but responsibility. Sansa had become fully intrigued at the tale he told, and knew a little of it herself. Was that the day my father sent Lord Dondarrion to hunt the mountain? Yes, it was. But before we left the city, a raven came from my father in Starfall. He said I was to return and meet my betrothed. He wanted me to prepare to inherit the title of Lord of Starfall, but it wasn't what I wanted. I replied to him telling that I was going to join Beric in 100 men to find and kill Gregor Clegane before I returned. But the gods were cruel to us when he found us first, with a battalion of 300 men. Only 40 of us escaped, and that was when Beric died, the first time. After he was resurrected, he formed the Brotherhood. In the beginning Beric told me I should go home, not get involved, and be safe from the war. He told me he promised my father that he'd return me home safely, and he couldn't that if he was going to fight. But I refused. I wanted to fight with Beric and the others, to be hero to the small folk, and repay the Lannister tenfold of the atrocities they committed. As we gathered more members, found ourselves in the company of 3 runaways from Harrenhal, 2 boys and girl, Arya and Gendry. Edric grinned and nodded at her. She told me all about her time with the Brotherhood and how they sold Gendry to a Red Woman of the Red God. I wasn't with them when it happened. I was at a tavern with some of the other men. The same tavern I met my wife, Neela. What was she doing there? Working. She was a commoner when I first met her, and as embarrassing as it is to say, but I was at the age where all I cared about was fighting and girls. I found myself returning to her company many times, but then Beric ordered me to go home. He didn't say why, only that I had no place in the Brotherhood any longer. I didn't want to leave, but then he begged me to. Before I left for home, I asked Neela to marry me, and she said yes. I knew that if I asked my father he would say no, since I was a highborn and betrothed to some girl I never met, but I didn't want to leave her. I couldn't. We wed before we sailed back to Starfall, and in that time my daughter Ashara was on her way to joining us. When the ship docked, and the people of Starfall came to greet us, I was ready to hear my father lose his head when he saw me and Neela together, but then I realized why Beric sent me back. Idrik felt grief wrapping around his heart as he drew closer to his failure. I learned that my father died while I was gone. He heard that Beric and his company were slain by the mountain, and thought I perished with them. He was driven mad with grief, and then one day he didn't wake up from his sleep. Idrik failed to contain a tear that fell from his eyes as his throat began to swell. While I was playing a hero in the war, my father mourned for me day after day. Because of my foolishness, he suffered. Because of me, he died. Edric's eyes fell to the ground, weighed by shame of his complete recklessness and old ambitions. You're not the only person to have ever chosen desire over duty. Probably, but I'm the only whose father was killed because I did. No, you're not. Edric looked up at her, wondering what she meant, and knew. My father tried to flee King's Landing with Arya and myself, but I didn't want to leave. I wanted to marry Joffrey and be queen. So I told Cersei of what my father was planning, and believed her when she promised he wouldn't be harmed. What happened after, the whole world knows. Edric couldn't hold back a smirk when he realized the irony of their fates. And here we both are. The question is, did we change enough for our fathers to be proud of who we are now? Edric knew he was a far better than who he once was, but not enough. I rule Starfall justly, and always listen to counsel when given, but I don't feel it's enough to be what my father wanted. I think it is. You've learned from your failure and are doing your duty to your family. You may not have done what your father wanted, but you took charge of your own destiny. I think that's something any father would be proud of. How can you be sure?
I would be if my children did.
Sansa gave him a little smile, enough to lift his spirits. But before they could continue their time together, a new person appeared from the shadows, being Varys the Spider. Pardon me, my lord and lady, but there seems to be a few men from King's Landing at the gates. Members of the Golden Company. What? Sansa said. What would they be doing here? Let's go find out, Edric advised. The three of them left the company of the fallen Starks and the darkness of the crypt. Sansa. Out in the courtyard were 6 men clad in golden-tinted armor and navy blue cloaks. They were surrounded by many Northmen, with hands gripping the hilts to their swords, still in scabbards. Jaime Lannister was among them, but turned his attention to Sansa when she approached. My lady, he said, some of these men helped me escape King's Landing, but they will only speak to you or the king and queen. Jon and Daenerys are resting right now. I'll deal with them. Sansa. My name is Will Cole. We come on behalf of Jon Coddington and a handful of others to pledge ourselves to the rightful king and queen of Westeros. Yes, my lady. He fought for Rhaegar in Robert's rebellion, and so did we, and we refused to fight for another mad ruler. She wasn't sure whether or not to believe them. She knew that there were some loyalists from the rebellion who were exiled, but it could all be just a ploy by Cersei. But luckily for her and everyone else, there was someone who could answer that question. Sansa turned to one of the guardsmen who stood near her. Could you bring my brother Bran to me? At once, my lady. The guard left swiftly while everyone stood in the falling snow, waiting. How many others are there? Sansa inquired. We left 10 men in King's Landing to clear out some of the wildfire. They won't get much, but they'll get what they can. Then there's about 190 led by Jon. They went to Dorne in hopes to steal some of the elephants we have. He may even come back with more loyal to the Targaryens.
How many more?
Until she knew whether or not this was a lie or the truth, she had to poke at every detail this man could provide. If she dug enough out of him, he might slip on his words and expose him hiding his true intentions.
I'm not sure, my lady.
There's about 500 stationed with the elephants, so it might only be a handful or less. Before she could continue, the guard returned, wheeling Bran in his chair next to Sansa. Bran, these men say they're here to fight for us. Are they telling the truth? Bran didn't answer. He only gazed at the men of the Golden Company, looking worried. Oh no. What is it? Sansa asked. I'm focusing so much on the north, I forgot to keep watch on the south. They're telling the truth, but Jon Coddington and his men won't be joining them. They're all dead. What? Will asked, the rest of the men looking concerned and confused. What are talking about? Cersei learned of your plans before you left King's Landing. Jon and his men were ambushed at Hellgate Hall by 30,000 sellswords from Essos. That's not possible, Varys declared. My little birds would have sent word to me if such a thing happened. Your little birds are dead. Euron saw to that before he ferried 14 different companies to Westeros. Varys looked grim and defeated. Never once had one of his spies been killed. Then Raleigh and the others, they're gone. Will and one of the other men looked grimmer than the other four. Raleigh Duckfield is alive, and so are his men. The 6 sellswords all looked hopeful for a moment, but not much. They've been discovered, but not reported to Cersei. They're sneaking wildfire out from beneath the city as we speak. How? Before Will could ask, Sansa intruded his question. The less you know, the better it will be. Will nodded his head, but remained confused. What about the 30,000 in Dorne? Edric asked. Are they going to attack the people? He sounded more worried than anyone else, and he had the right to be. The armies of Dorne were gone, and there was no one to protect the castle. But if Cersei ordered it, she would be breaking the truce that was struck, and every realm of Westeros would rise against her, including the Westerlands. They're waiting to hear if we win or lose against the dead. If we lose, they'll flee back to Essos. But I don't know what they're planning to do if we win. What about Cersei? What did she tell them? Nothing. I think she knows that we can watch her. But Raleigh and the others, Will interrupted, if they've been discovered, then why haven't they been turned in? Don't worry. They'll remain unnoticed. Bran assured him. But how are they still alive? If someone knows what they're doing, then how hasn't the Queen's hand learned of it yet? The answer to that is on its way. Bran didn't say anything else after that. He remained silent and left everyone curious and confused. But the men from the Golden Company were more worried and saddened to learn of their leader's death. Thank you, Bran, Sansa told him before facing the exiles. If my brother says you are friends to us, then I welcome you into our armies. I will have someone take care of you and find a place for you to stay. Thank you, Lady Stark. The 6 men gave courteous bows before Sansa left their presence. Jaime Lannister and Varys followed her into the castle, desiring to discuss the matter further, while Edric took it upon himself to take care of the men. My lady, Varys said, if the group of men in King's Landing have been discovered to be sneaking out the wildfire, it won't be long until Qyburn learns of it and reports to Cersei. What are you suggesting we do? Sansa asked, continuing through the hallways to her chambers. From what we know, no one except for the Golden Company is allowed to enter or leave the city, and we can't provide any help until the dead are dealt with. Not to mention, Jaime said, that if we try to enter and Cersei learns about it, she might just ignite the wildfire and destroy the city. If she can't rule, then no one can, but she has to be planning something. If the war against the dead is won, then it will be obvious to the world who the better rulers are. She has to know this if she's going to continue to fight. She must be hoping our losses are too many, Sansa stated. We could have less than 10,000 survivors and 1 dragon and we could still win against her. Aegon had less than 3,000 men when he began his conquest, but he also had more than just 1 dragon. But if we lose all of the dragons, then we're lost. Sansa reminded. That's why only 2 will be facing the Night King and Viserion, Varys said. Sansa didn't like that reasoning that much, and it was strategically necessary for them all. Jon was the one who would have to deal with the Night King, and he accepted that he and the dragons with him might perish. That was the real reason he was having Daenerys only be support. He wanted her and their sons far away from the worst part of the battle. Whatever she's planning, we need to start a counter-strategy, Sansa told them as they arrived at her door. Sarah Jaime could see to this with the other leaders of the realms. As you wish, my lady, Jaime bowed his head before taking his leave. Lord Varys, I'm sorry about what happened to your little birds. You had no part in it, my lady, therefore there is nothing you must apologize for. But thank you for your sympathies nonetheless. We need to assume that more of your spies will be unable to listen to whispers of others. Find Lord Reed and gather some of his wargs. We can use them to keep watch on the south if anything changes. At once, my lady. Varys departed and Sansa entered her room. Finally, in the privacy of her chambers, she could gather her thoughts and think of what else had to be done, now that there would be more opposition from the south. She took a seat in her chair at her desk and relaxed for a moment, letting her thoughts drift to something positive. But she kept finding them to linger around Edric Dane. She shook her head to rid herself of these feelings. For goodness sake, she said to herself. He's married and he has children. But thinking of him gave her hope that maybe there were more men like him. People of valor that she once dreamed of before she realized the truth of how ugly the world was. But people like him seemed to make it look better than it was. Something she was glad she could feel.